Wowzers. Actually have bodies today. Cool. Welcome, one and all. Thanks for tuning in. Sorry about the delay. Uh, Normally I start at noon and I'm now starting at 20 minutes late. Um, my PDF of the story stopped working, so I had to jerry-rig and find an alternative solution, which meant going to a archive equivalent to get it again. Um, so here we are. This is going to be a read along if people wish. In fact, I could probably zoom that in if I really wanted to. Zoom that a bit more. Ew, that's ugly. Where are you? I do not normally use Microsoft Edge, so I'm a little like, wait a minute, how does this work? There we go, that'll do for now. Zip that out a smidge. I don't know if that's more readable for people. It's kind of small at the little thumbnail I'm looking at. But hey, welcome back to Free Read Fridays. I'm your intrepid narrator, Fraggoth, and if this doesn't get me canceled, nothing will. So the guy who's read like actual sex scenes in actual books, and I'm still not. Those still are up. So what do I know? So way back in the distant future year of 2020. An author named Isabel Fall had a work published called I Sexually Identify as an Attack Helicopter to Clark's World magazine. It was in the January issue of 2020, as you can see there up the right-hand side. Issue 160. I'm not going to say anything about what happened after it got posted. I'm just going to read the story, and then we'll talk about Fallout. Um, among other things. Not the video game series. Sorry to anyone who got really excited. Um, for what it's worth, New Vegas is the best post Fallout 2 Fallout ever made, but I think everybody already knew that. Fallout 76 need not apply. Is my mouse visible at all? Well, I can highlight things and that's visible. Yes, my mouse is visible, so I'll leave that off the screen. Oh, I can nudge that up a little. I had to do some kind of aggressive cropping, but I did not. That's probably a little better. There we go. With what I had on hand. So, yeah, it's a short story written in 2020. And this is reading right off the archived version of the Clark's World page. I have links in the stream description, or video description, if you're on YouTube. That should allow you to go to the links I have available, including Aftermath articles. I ask that you do not go to the Aftermath articles early, not because spoilers, because honestly, those articles have basically nothing whatsoever to do, and those responses have basically nothing whatsoever to do with the short story in question. And that will become abundantly clear when we get there, because nobody really talks about it much. The story, just other things. So, I'm not doing this to make any particular stand or to rock the boat or whatever. After I read the story, hopefully, if there are people tuned in, I'd like to have like a brief back and forth discussion with anybody on. So feel free to, if you're watching live, to blast your opinions out. Um, and then I'll read the Fallout articles. Basically, just say what did we like about this? What did we feel didn't work? Um, that sort of thing. And if nobody's on, nobody's on, and I'll say what I liked or felt worked and didn't work. Um, Generally, when it comes to young aspiring authors, I try to lean optimistic and supportive. In this case, that won't matter too much, but better late than never. So, without further ado, I sexually identify as an attack helicopter by Isabel Fall. Life is good, Frank Misers. Thanks for tuning in. I sexually identify as an attack helicopter. I lied. According to U.S. Army Technical Manual 0, the soldier as a system, attack helicopter is a gender identity, not a biological sex. My dog tags and Form 3349 say my body is an XX karyotype somatic female. But really, I didn't lie. My body is a component in my mission, subordinate to what I truly am. If I say I am an attack helicopter, then my body, my sex, is too. I'll prove it to you. When I joined the Army, I consented to tactical role gender reassignment. It was mandatory for the MOS I'd tested into. I was nervous. I'd never been anything but a woman before. But I decided that I was done with womanhood, over what womanhood could do for me. I wanted to be something furiously new. To the people who say a woman would have refused to do what I do, I say, isn't that the point? I fly. Red evening over the white Mojave, and I watch the sun set through a canopy of polycarbonate and glass, clitoral bulge of cockpit on the helicopter's nose. Lightning probes the burned wreck of an oil refinery, and the Santa Ana feeds a smoldering wildfire and pulls pine soot out of southwest. Whoops, and pulls pine soot out southwest across the big Pacific. We are alone with each other, Axis and I, flying low. We are traveling south to strike a high school. Rotor wash flattens rings of desert creosote. Did you know that creosote bushes clone themselves? The 10,000-year elders enforce dead zones where nothing can grow except more creosote. Beetles and mice live among them, the way our cities had pigeons and mice. I guess the analogy breaks down because the creosotes lasted 10,000 years. You don't need an attack helicopter to tell you that our cities haven't. The Army gave me gene therapy to make my blood toxic to mosquitoes. Soon you will have that too, to fight malaria in the Hudson floodplain and on the banks of the Greater Lake. Oh geez, that skips up quite a lot when I page down. One sec, I lost my spot. I should highlight it. There we go. Now I cross Highway 40, southbound at 200 knots. The Apache's engine is electric and silent. Decibel killers sop up the rotor noise. White bright infrared vision shows me stripes of heat, the tire tracks left by Pear Mesa school buses. Buried housing projects smolder under the dirt, radiators curled until sunset. This is enemy territory. You can tell because, though this desert was once Nevada and California, there are no American flags. Barb, the Apache whispers, in a voice that Axis once identified, to my alarm, as my mother's. Waypoint soon. Axis. I call out to my gunner, tucked into the nose ahead of me. I can see only gray helmet and flight suit shoulders, but I know that body wholly, the hard knots of muscle, the ridge of pelvic girdle, the shallow navel and flat, hard chest. An attack helicopter has a crew of two. My gunner is my marriage, my pillar, the completion of my gender. Axis, the repeated call sign means, I hear you. 10 minutes to target. Ready for target, Axis says. But there is again that roughness, like a fold in carbon fiber. I heard it when we reviewed our fragment orders for the strike. I hear it again now. I cannot ignore it any more than I could ignore a battery fire. It is a fault in a person and a system I trust with my life. But I can choose to ignore it for now. The target bumps okay. The target bumps up over the horizon. The low mounds of Kelso Ventura District. Oh, gosh. These line breaks are killing me. I'm sorry. The target bumps up over the horizon. The low mounds of Kelso Ventura District High burn warm gray through a parfait coating of aerogel insulation and desert soil. We have crossed a third of the continental U.S. to strike a school built by Americans. Axis cues up a missile. Black eyes narrowed, telltales reflected against clear, laser-washed cornea. Call the shot, Barb. Stand by, maneuvering. I lift us above the desert floor, buying some room for the missile to run. Watching the probability of kill calculation change with each motion of the aircraft. Before the army, my name was Seo Ji-hee. Now my call sign is Barb, which isn't short for Barbara. I share a rank, flight warrant officer, a gender, and a urinary system with my gunner, Axis. We are harnessed and catheterized into the narrow tandem cockpit of a Boeing AH-70 Apache Mystic. America names its helicopters for the people it destroyed. We are here to degrade and destroy strategic targets of the United States of America's war against the Pear Mesa Budget Committee. If you disagree with the war, so be it. I ask your empathy, not your sympathy. Save your pity for the poor legislators who had to find some constitutional framework for declaring war against a credit union. The reasons for war don't much matter to us. We want to fight the way a woman wants to be gracious, the way a man wants to be firm. Our need is as vamp fierce as the strutting queen, and dryly subtle as the dapper lesbian, and comfortable as the soft resilience of the demi-woman. How often do you analyze the reasons for your own gender? You might sigh at the necessity of morning makeup, or hide your love for your friends behind beer and bravado. Maybe you even resent the punishment for breaking these norms. But how often, really, do you think about the grand strategy of gender? The mess of history and sociology, biology and game theory that gave rise to your pants and your hair and your salary? The casus belli? Often, you might say. All the time. It haunts me. Then you, more than anyone, helped make me. When I was a woman, I wanted to be good at woman. I wanted to darken my eyes and strut in heels. I wanted to laugh from my throat when I was pleased, laugh so low that women would shiver in contentment down the block. At the same time, I resented it all. I wanted to be sharper, stronger, a new made thing, exquisite and formidable. Did I want that because I was taught to hate being a woman? Or because I hated being taught anything at all? Now I am jointed inside. Now I am geared and shafted. I am a being of opposing torques. The noise I make is cancelled by decibel killers, so I am no louder than a woman laughing through two walls. When I was a woman, I wanted to have friends who would gasp at the precision and surprise of my gifts. Now I show friendship by tracking the motions of your head, looking at what you look at, the way one helicopter's sensors can be slaved to the motions of another. When I was a woman, Oh, whoops. When I was a woman, I wanted my skin to be as smooth and dark as the sintered stone countertop in our kitchen. Now my skin is boron carbide and Kevlar. Now I have a wrist callus where I press my hydration sensor into my skin too hard and too often. Now I have bit down nails from the claustrophobia of the bus ride to the flight line. I paint them desert colors, compulsively. When I was a woman, I was always aware of surveillance. The threat of the eyes on me, the chance that I would cross over some threshold of detection and become a target. Now I do the exact same thing. But I am counting radars and lidars and pit Viper thermal sensors, waiting for a missile. I am gas turbines. I am the way I never sit on the same side of the table as a stranger. I am most comfortable in the moonless dark, in low places between hills. I am always thirsty and always tense. I tense my core and pace my breath, even when coiled up in a briefing chair, as if my tail rotor must cancel the spin of the main blades, and the turbines must whirl and the plates flex against the pitch links, or I will go down spinning to my death. An airplane wants in its very body to stay flying. A helicopter is propelled by its interior near disaster. I speak the attack command to my gunner.
Normalize the target.
Nothing happens.
Axis. Com check. Barb, Axis. I hear you.
No explanation for the fault. There is nothing wrong with the weapon attack parameters. Nothing wrong with any system at all, except the one without any telltales. My spouse. My gunner.
Normalize the target.
I repeat.
Axis. Rifle 1.
The weapon falls off our wing, ignites, homes in on the hard, invisible point of the laser designator. Missiles are faster than you think, more like a bullet than a bird. If you've ever seen a bird. The weapon penetrates the concrete shelter of Kelso Ventura High School and fills the empty halls with thermobaric aerosol. Then, ignition. The detonation hollows out the school like a hooked finger scooping out an egg. There are not more than a few janitors in there, a few teachers working late. They are bycatch. What do I feel in that moment? Relief. Not sexual, not like eating or pissing, not like coming in from the heat to the cool, dry climate shelter. It's a sense of passing, walking down the street in the right clothes, with the right partner, to the right job. That feeling. Have you felt it? But there is also an itch of worry. Why did Axis hesitate? How did Axis hesitate? Kelso Ventura High School collapses into its own basement.
Target normalized.
Axis reports, without emotion, and my heart beats slow and worried. I want you to understand the way I feel about Axis is hard and impersonal and lovely. It is exactly the way you would feel if a beautiful, silent turbine whirled beside you day and night, protecting you, driving you on, coursing with current, fiercely bladed, devoted. God, it's love. It's love I can't explain. It's cold and good.
Barb.
I say, which means I understand.
Exiting north 030. Cupids 2.
I adjust to the collective, feel the swash plate push up against the pitch links. The links tilt the angle of the rotors so they ease their bite on the air. And the Apache, my body, sinks toward the hot desert floor. Warm updraft caresses the hull, sensual contrast with the Santa Ana wind. I shiver in delight. Oh, geez, I didn't highlight, so of course I don't know where I am. There we are. Suddenly, warning receivers hiss in my ear, poke me in the sacral vertebrae, put a dark thunderstorm note into my air.
Shit.
Axis hisses.
Air search radar active. Bearing 192. Angles 20. Distance 80 clicks. It's a fast mover. He must have heard the blast.
A fighter. A combat jet. Pear Mesa's mercenary defenders have an air force, and they are out on the hunt.
A werewolf. Must be. Gown? Gown up.
I cue the plasma sheath stealth system that protects us from radar and laser hits. The Apache glows with lines of arc-weld light, UFO light. Our rotor wash blasts the plasma into a bright wedding train behind us. To the enemy's sensors, that trail of plasma is as thick and soft as insulating foam. To our eyes, it's cold aurora fire.
Let's get the fuck out.
I touch the cyclic and we sideslip through Mojave dust, watching the school fall into itself. There is no reason to do this except that somehow I know Axis wants to see. Finally, I pull the nose around, aim us northeast, shedding light like a comet buzzing the desert on its way into the sun.
Werewolf at 70 clicks.
Axis reports.
Coming our way. Time to intercept 6 minutes.
The werewolf apostles are mercenaries, survivors from the militaries of climate-seared states. They sell their training and their hardware to earn their refugee peoples a few degrees more distance from the equator. The heat of the broken world has chased them here to chase us. Before my assignment neurosurgery, they made me sit through, I could bear to sit back then, the mandatory course on applied constructive gender theory. Slouched in a fungus-nibbled plastic chair as transparencies slid across the cracked screen of a de-networked briefing element overhead projector. How I learned the technology of gender. Long before we had writing or farms or post-digital strike helicopters, we had each other. We lived together and changed each other, and so we needed to say, "This is who I am. This is what I do." So, in the same way that we attached sounds to meanings to let's try that sentence again. My bad. I am sorry. Let's confuse all our sentences today. So, in the same way that we attached sounds to meanings to make language, we began to attach clusters of behavior to signal social roles. Those clusters were rich and quick changing, and so, just like language, we needed networks devoted to processing them. We needed a place in the brain to construct and to analyze gender. Generations of queer activists fought to make gender a self-determined choice, and to undo the creeping determinism that said, the way it is now is the way it always was and always must be. Generations of scientists mapped the neural wiring that motivated and encoded the gender choice. And the moment their work reached a usable stage, the moment society was ready to accept plastic gender and scientists were ready to manipulate it, the military found a new resource. Armed with functional connectome mapping and neural plastics, the military can make gender tactical. If gender has always been a construct, then why not construct new ones? My gender networks have been reassigned to make me a better AH-70 Apache Mystic pilot. This is better than conventional skill learning. I can show you why. Look at a diagram of an attack helicopter's airframe and components. Tell me how much of it you grasp at once. Now, look at a person near you, their clothes, their hair, their makeup and expression, the way they meet or avoid your eyes. Tell me which was richer with information about danger and capability. Tell me which was easier to access and interpret. The gender networks are old and well connected. They work. I remember being a woman. I remember it the way you remember that old beloved hobby you left behind. Woman felt like my prom dress, polyester satin smoothed between little hand and little hip. Woman felt like a little tick of the lips when I was interrupted, or like teasing out the mood my boyfriend wouldn't explain. Like remembering his mom's birthday for him, or giving him a list of things to buy at the store when he wanted to be better about groceries. I was always aware of being small, aware that people could hurt me. I spent a lot of time thinking about things that had happened right before something awful. I would look around me and ask myself, are the same things happening now? Women live in cross reference. It is harder work than we know. Now I think about being small as an advantage for nape of Earth maneuvers and pop up guided missile attacks. Now I yield to speed walkers in the hall like I need to avoid fouling my rotors. Now, walking beneath high tension power lines makes me feel the way that a cis man would feel if he strutted down the street in a miniskirt and heels. I'm comfortable in open spaces, but only if there's terrain to break it up. I hate conversations I haven't started. I interrupt shamelessly so that I can make my point and leave. People treat me like I'm dangerous, like I could hurt them if I wanted to. They want me protected and watched over. They bring me water and ask how I'm doing. People want me on their team. They want what I can do. A fighter is hunting us, and I am afraid that my gunner has gender dysphoria. 20,000 feet above us, still we use feet for altitude. The bathroom tiled transceivers cupped behind the nose cone of a werewolf Apostle J-20S let's mangle that again. 20,000 feet above us, still we use feet for altitude. The bathroom tiled transceivers cupped behind the nose cone of a werewolf Apostle J-20S fighter broadcast fingers of radar light. Each beam cast at a separate frequency, a fringed caress instead of a pointed prod. But we are jumpy, we are hyper-vigilant. We feel that creeper touch. I get the cold rush skin prickle feel of a stranger following you in the dark. Has he seen you? Is he just going the same way? If he attacks, what will you do? Could you get help? Could you scream? Put your keys between your fingers, like it will help. Glass branches of possibility grow from my skin, waiting to be snapped off by the truth.
Give me a warning before he's in IRST range.
I order Axis.
We're going north. Access.
The werewolf's infrared sensor will pick up the heat of us, our engine and plasma shield, burning against the twilight desert. The same system that hides us from his radar makes us hot and visible to his IRST. I throttle up, running faster, and the Apache whispers alarm. Gown over speed. We're moving too fast for the plasma stealth system, and the wind's tearing it from our skin. We are not modest. I want to duck behind a ridge to cover myself, but I push through the discomfort, feeling out the trade-off between stealth and distance. Like the morning check in the mirror, trading the confidence of a good look against the threat of reaction. When the women of Soviet Russia went to war against the Nazis, when they volunteered by the thousands to serve as snipers and pilots and tank drivers and infantry and partisans, they fought hard and they fought well. They ate frozen horse dung and hauled men twice their weight out of burning tanks. They shot at their own mothers to kill the Nazis behind her. But they did not lose their gender. They gave up the inhibition against killing, but would not give up flowers in their hair, polish for their shoes, a yearning for the young lieutenant, a kiss on his dead lips. And if that is not enough to convince you that gender grows deep enough to thrive in war, when the war ended, the Soviet women were punished. They went unmarried and unrespected. They were excluded from the victory parades. They had violated their gender to fight for the state, and the state judged that violation worth punishment more than their heroism was worth reward. Gender is stronger than war. It remains when all else flees. When I was a woman, I wanted to machine myself. I loved nails cut like laser arcs and painted violet bright in bathrooms that smelled like laboratories. I wanted to grow thick legs with fat and muscle that made shapes under the skin like Nazca lines. I loved my birth control. I loved that I could turn my period off. Loved the home beauty feedback kits that told you what to eat and dose to adjust your scent, your skin, your moods. I admired, wasn't sure if I wanted to be or wanted to fuck, the women in the build your own shit videos I watched on our local image of the old internet. Women who made cyber attack kits and jewelry and sterile printed IUDs, made their own huge wedge heels and fitted bras and skin thin chameleon dresses. Women who talked about their implants the same way they talked about computers, phones, tools. Technologies of access, technologies of self-expression. Something about their merciless self-possession and self-modification stirred me. The first time I ever meant to masturbate, I imagined one of these women coming into my house, picking the lock, telling me exactly what to do, how to be like her. I told my first boyfriend about this. I showed him pictures, and he said, "Girl, you bi as hell," which was true, but also wrong. Because I did not want those dresses, those heels, those bodies in the way I wanted my boyfriend. I wanted to possess that power. I wanted to have it and be it. The Apache is my body now, and like most bodies, it is sensual. Fabric armor that stiffens beneath my probing fingers. Stub wings clustered with ordnance. Rotors so light and strong they do not even droop. As artificial looking, to an older pilot, as breast implants. And I brush at the black ring of a sensor housing, like the tip of a nail lifting a stray lash from the white of your eye. I don't shave, which all the fast jet pilots do, down to the last curly scrotal hair. Nobody expects a helicopter to be sleek. I have hairy armpits and thick black bush all the way to my ass crack. The things that are taboo and arousing to me are the things taboo to helicopters. I like to be picked up, moved, pressed, bent and folded, held down, made to shudder, made to abandon control. Do these last details bother you? Does the topography of my pubic hair feel intrusive and unnecessary? I like that. I like to intrude, inflict damage, withdraw. A year after you read this, maybe those paragraphs will be the only thing you remember, and you will know why the rules of gender are worth recruitment. But we cannot linger on the point of attack.
He's coming north. Time to intercept 3 minutes. Shit. How long until he gets us on thermal? 90 seconds with the gown on.
Danger has swept away Axis's hesitation.
Shit. He's not quite on zero aspect. Yeah, he's coming up a few degrees off our heading. He's not sure exactly where we are. He's hunting. He'll be sure soon enough. Can we kill him? With sidewinders?
Axis pauses articulately. The target is 20,000 feet above us, and he has a laser that can blind our missiles.
We'd have more luck bailing out and hiking. All right, I'm gonna fly us out of this. Sure. Just check the gun. 10 tons already, Barb.
When the climate and economy and pathology all went finally and totally critical along the Gulf Coast, the federal government fled Cabo fever and VARD II to huddle behind New York's flood barriers. We left 1,106 local disaster governments behind. One of them was near Pear Mesa Budget Committee. The rest of them were doomed. Pear Mesa was different because it had bought up and hardened its own hardware and power. So Pear Mesa's neural nets kept running, retrained from credit union portfolio management to the emergency triage of hundreds of thousands of starving, sick refugees. Pear Mesa's computers taught themselves to govern the forsaken southern seaboard. Now they coordinate water distribution, re-express crop genomes, ration electricity for survival AC, manage all the life support humans need to exist in our warmed over hell. But, like all advanced neural nets, these systems are black boxes. We have no idea how they work, what they think. Why do Pear Mesa's AIs order the planting of pear trees? Because pears were their corporate icon and the AIs associate pear trees with areas under their control. Why does no one make the AIs stop? Because no one knows what else is tangled up with the plant pear trees impulse. The AIs may have learned, through some rewarded fallacy or perverse founder effect, that pear trees cause humans to have babies. They may believe that their only function is to build support systems around pear trees. When America declared war on Pear Mesa, their AIs identified a useful diagnostic criterion for hostile territory: the posting of 50-star American flags. Without ever knowing what a flag meant, without any concept of nations or symbols, they ordered the destruction of the stars and stripes in Pear Mesa territory. That was convenient for propaganda. But the real reason for the war, sold to a hesitant Congress by technocrats and strategic and that was convenient for propaganda. But the reason for the war, sold to a hesitant Congress by technocrats and strategic ecologists, was the ideology of scale atrocity. Pear Mesa's AIs could not be modified by humans, thus could not be joined with America's own governing algorithms, thus must be forced to yield all their control, or else remain forever separate. And that separation was intolerable. By refusing the United States administration, our superior resources, and planning capability, Pear Mesa's AIs condemned citizens who might otherwise be saved to die. A genocide by neglect. Wasn't that the unforgivable crime of fossil capitalism? The creation of systems whose failure modes led to mass death? Didn't we have a moral imperative to intercede? Pear Mesa cannot surrender because the neural nets have a basic imperative to remain online. Pear Mesa's citizens cannot question the machine's decisions. Everything the machines do is connected in ways no human can comprehend. Disobey one order, and you might as well disobey them all. But none of this is why I kill. I kill for the same reason men don't wear short skirts, the same reason I used to pluck my brows, the reason envy people are supposed to be unfair and stupid, yes, but still androgynous with short hair. Are those good reasons to do something? If you say no, honestly no, can you tell me you break these rules without fear or cost? But killing isn't a gender role, you might tell me. Killing isn't a decision about how to prevent your own autonomous self to the world. It is coercive and punitive. Killing is therefore not an act of gender. I wish that were true. Can you tell me honestly that killing is a genderless act? The method, the motive, the victim? When you imagine the innocent dead, who do you see? I may have read a line or two with the wrong intent there, my bad.
Barb,
Axis calls softly. Your own voice always sounds wrong on recordings. Too nasal. Axis's voice sounds wrong when it's not coming straight into my skull through helmet mic.
Barb, how are we doing? Exiting 150 knots north, still in his radar, but he hasn't locked us up. How are you doing?
I cringe in discomfort. The question is an indirect way for Axis to admit something's wrong, and that indirection is obscene. Like hiding a corroded tail rotor bearing from your maintenance guys.
I'm good.
I say with fake ease.
I'm in flow. Can't you feel it?
I dip the nose to match a drop off below, provoking a whine from the terrain detector. I am teasing, striking a pose.
We're gonna be okay. I feel it, Barb.
But Axis is tense, worried about our pursuer and other things. Doesn't laugh.
How about you? Nominal.
Again the indirection, again the denial, and so I blurt it out.
Are you dysphoric? What?
Axis says calmly.
You've been hesitating, acting funny. Is your...
There is no way to ask someone if their militarized gender conditioning is malfunctioning.
Are you good? I...
Hesitation. It makes me cringe again, in second-hand shame. Never hesitate.
I don't know. Do you need to go on report?
Severe gender dysphoria can be a flight risk. If Axis hesitates over something that needs to be done instantly, the mission could fail decisively. We could both die.
I don't want that.
Axis says.
I don't want that either.
I say, desperately. I want nothing less than that.
But, Axis, if...
The warning receiver climbs to a steady crow call.
He knows we're here. He knows we're here.
I say, to Axis's tight inhalation.
He can't get a lock through the gown, but he's aware of our presence. Fuck. Blinder, blinder. He's got his laser on us.
The fighter's LiDAR pod is trying to catch the glint of a reflection off us.
Shit.
Axis says.
We're gonna get shot. The gown should defeat it. He's not close enough for thermal yet. He's gonna launch anyway. He's gonna shoot and then get a lock to steer in. I don't know. Missiles aren't cheap these days.
The ESM mast on the Apache's rotor hub, mounted like a lamp on a post, contains a cluster of electro-optical sensors that constantly scan the sky. The Distributed Aperture Sensor. When the DAS detects a flash of a missile launch, it plays a warning tone and uses my vest to poke me in the small of my back. The vest pokes me in the small of my back.
Barb. Missile launch south. Barb. Fox 3 inbound. 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 He fired.
Axis calls.
Barb. Barb.
I acknowledge. Sorry. I keep covering my mouth to do the face in the mask thing, and I keep brushing the microphone, and my bad. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. I fuck. Oh, you want to know. Many of you, at least. It's all right. An attack helicopter isn't a private way of being. Your needs and capabilities must be maintained for the mission. I don't think becoming an attack helicopter changed who I wanted to fuck. I like butch, assertive people. I like talent and prestige, the status that comes of doing things well. I was never taught the lie that I was wired for monogamy, which, but, my eyes skipped a line, that's why, okay. I was never taught the lie that I was wired for monogamy, but I was still careful with men. I was still wary, and I could never tell him why. That I was afraid not because of him, but because of all the men who'd seemed good like him, at first, and then turned into something else. No one stalks an attack helicopter. No slack-eyed, well-dressed drunk punches you for ignoring the little rape he slurs at your neckline. No one even breaks your heart. With my dopamine system tied up by the reassignment surgery, fully assigned to mission behavior, I can't fall in love with anything except my own purpose. Are you aware of your body? Do you feel your spine when you stand, your hips when you walk, the tightness and the mass in your core? When you look at yourself, whose eyes do you use? Your own? I am always in myself. I never see myself through my partner's eyes. I have weapons to use, of course, ways of moving, moans and cries. But I measure those weapons by their effect, not by their similarity to some idea of how I should be. Flying is the loop of machinery and pilot, the sense of your motion on the controls translated into torque and lift, the airframe's reaction shaping your next motion until the loop closes and machine and pilot are one. Awareness collapses to the moment. You are always doing the right thing exactly as it needs to be done. Sex is the same, the search for everything in an instant. Of course I fuck Axis. A few decades ago, this would have been a crime. What a waste of perfectly useful behavior. What a waste of that lean muscled form and those perfect killing hands that know me millimeter by millimeter, system by system, so there is no mystique between us. No secret places or feminine mysteries, only the tortuously exact technical exercise of nerves and pressure. Oxytocin released to flow between us by the press of knuckles in my cunt. When I come beneath Axis, I cry out. I press my body close. I want that utter loss of control that I feel nowhere else. Heartbeat in arched throat. Nipple beneath straining tongue. And my mind is hyper-activated, free associating. And as Axis works in me, I see the work we do together. I see puffs of 30mm autocannon detonating on night-cold desert floor. Violence doesn't get me off, but getting off makes me revel in who I am. And I am violent, made for violence, alive in the fight. Does that surprise you? Does it bother you to mingle cold technical discipline with hot flesh and sweat? Let me ask you, why has the worst insult you can give a combat pilot always been weak dick? Have you ever been exultant? Have you ever known that you are a triumph? Have you ever felt that it was your whole life's purpose to do something, and all that you needed to succeed was to be entirely yourself? To be yourself well is the wholest and best feeling that anything has ever felt. It is what I feel when I am about to live or die. The werewolf's missile arches down on us, motor burned out, falling like an arrow. He is trying a shoot on prospect attack. He cannot find us exactly, so he fires a missile that will finish the search, lock onto our heat, or burn through our stealth with its onboard radar, or acquire us optically like a staring human eye. Or at least make us react. Like the cat callers barked, "Hey!" to evoke the flinch or the huddle, the proof that he has power. We are ringed in the vortex of a dilemma. If we switch off the stealth gown, the werewolf fighter will lock its radar onto us and guide the missile to the kill. If we keep the stealth system on, the missile's heat seeker will home in on the blazing plasma. I know what to do. Not in the way you learn how to fly a helicopter, but the way you know how to hold your elbows when you gesture. A helicopter is more than a hovering fan, see? The blades of the rotor tilt and swivel. When you turn the aircraft left, the rotors deepen their bite into the air on one side of their spin to make off-center lift. You cannot force a helicopter or it will throw you to the earth. You must be gentle. I caress the cyclic. The Apache's nose comes up smooth and fast. The Mojave horizon disappears under the chin. Axis's gasp from the front seat passes through the microphone and into the bones of my face. The pitch indicator climbs up towards 60 degrees, ass down, chin up. Our airspeed plummets from 150 knots to 60. We hang there for an instant like a dancer in an oversway. The missile is coming straight down at us. We are not even running anymore. And I lower the collective, flattening the blades of the rotor so that they cannot cut the air at an angle, and we lose all lift. We fall. I tow the rudder. The tail rotor yields a little of its purpose, which is to counter the torque of the main rotor, and that liberated torque spins the Apache clockwise, opposite the rotor's turn, until we are nose down 60 degrees, facing back the way we came, looking into the Mojave Desert as it rises up to take us. I have pirouetted us in place. Plasma fire blows in wraith pennants as the stealth system tries to keep us modest.
Can you get it?
I ask.
Access.
I raise the collective again, and the rotors bite back into the air. We do not rise, but our fall slows down. Cyclic stick answers to the barest twitch of wrist, and I remember, once, how that slim wrist made me think of fragility, frailty, fear. I am remembering, even as I pitch the helicopter back and we climb again, nose up, tail down, scudding backward into the sky while aimed at our chasing killer. Axis is on top now, above me in the front seat, and in front of Axis is the chin gun, pointed 60 degrees up into heaven. "Barb," the helicopter whispers, like my mother in my ear, "missile 10 seconds. Music? Glare?" No. No jamming. The werewolf missile will home in on jamming like a wolf with a taste for pepper. Our laser might dazzle the seeker, drive it off course, but if the missile turns, then Axis cannot take the shot. It is not a choice. I trust Axis. Axis steers the nose turret onto the target, and I imagine strong fingers on my own chin, turning me for a kiss, looking up into the red, scorched sky. Axis chooses the weapon, 30mm guided prox AP, and aims and fires with all the idle don't have to try confidence of the first girl dribbling a soccer ball who I ever for a moment loved. The chin autocannon barks out 10 rounds a second. It is effective out to 1.5 kilometers. The missile is moving more than 100 meters per second. Axis has 1 second exactly, 10 shots of 30mm smart grenade to save us. A mote of gray shadow rushes at us and intersects the line of cannon fire from the gun. It becomes a spray of light. The Apache tings and rattles. The desert below us, behind us, stipples with tiny plumes of dust that pick up in the wind and settle out like a sift from a hand.
Got it.
Axis says.
I love you. Axis.
Many of you are veterans in the act of gender. You weigh the gaze and disposition of strangers in a subway car and select where to stand, how often to look up, how to accept or reject conversation. Like a frequency hopping radar, you modulate your attention for the people in your context. Do not look too much lest you seem interested or alarming. You regulate your yawns, your appetite, your toilette. You do it constantly and without failure. You are aces. What other way could be better? What other neural pathways are so available to constant reprogramming, yet so deeply connected to judgment, behavior, reflex? Some people say that there is no gender, that it is a postmodern construct, that in fact there are only man and woman, and a few marginal confusions. To those people, I ask, if your body fact is enough to establish your gender, you would willingly wear bright dresses and cry at movies, wouldn't you? You would hold hands and compliment each other on your beauty, wouldn't you? Because your cock would be enough to make you a man. Have you ever guarded anything so vigilantly as you protect yourself against the shame of gender wrong? The same force that keeps you from gender wrong is the force that keeps me from fucking up. The missile is dead. The werewolf apostle is still up there.
He's turning off.
Axis has taken over defensive awareness while I fly.
Radar off. Laser off. He's letting us go. Afraid of our fighters?
The mercenaries cannot replace a lost J-20S. And he probably has a wingman, still hiding, who would die too if they stray into a trap.
Yes.
Axis says,
Keep the gown on.
in case he's trying to bluff us into shutting down our stealth.
We'll stick to the terrain until he's over the horizon. Can you fly us out?
The Apache is fighting me. Fragments of the destroyed missile have pitted the rotors, damaged the hub assembly, and jammed the control surfaces. I begin to crush the shrapnel with the Apache's hydraulics, pounding the metal free with careful control inputs. But the necessary motions also move the aircraft. Half a second's error will crash us into the desert. I have to calculate how to unjam the shrapnel while accounting for the effects of that shrapnel on my flight authority and keeping the aircraft stable despite my constant control inputs while moving at 130 knots across the desert.
Barb,
I say,
not a problem.
and for an hour I fly without thought, without any feeling except the smooth stone joy of doing something that takes everything. The night desert is black to the naked eye, soft gray to thermal. My attention flips between my left eye, focused on the instruments, and my right eye, looking outside. I am a black box like the Pear Mesa AIs. Information arrives, a throb of feedback in the cyclic, a shift of Axis's weight, a dune crest ahead, and my hands and feet move to hold us steady. If I focused on what I was doing, it would all fall apart. So I don't.
Are you happy?
Axis asks. Good to talk now. Keep my conscious mind from interfering with the gearbox of reflexes below.
Yeah.
I say, and I blow out a breath into my mask.
Yeah, I am.
A lightness in my ribs.
Yeah, I feel good. Why do you think we just blew up a school?
Why did I text my best friend the appearance and license number of all my cab drivers, just in case? because those were the things that had to be done. Listen, I exist in this context. To make war is part of my gender. I get what I need from the flight line, from the ozone tang of charging stations and the shimmer of distant bodies warping in the tarmac heat, from the 20 minutes of anxiety after we land when I cannot convince myself that I am home and safe and that I am no longer keeping us alive with the constant adjustments of my hands and feet.
Deplete their skilled labor supply, I guess. Attack the demographic skill curve. Kind of a long-term objective. Kind of makes you think it's not going to be over by election season. We don't get to know why the AIs pick the targets.
Maybe destroying this school was an accident, a quirk of some otherwise successful network, coupled to the load-bearing elements of a vast strategy.
Hey,
I say after a beat of silence.
you did good back there. You thought I wouldn't. Barb,
A more honest yes than yes, because it is my name, and it acknowledges that I am the one with the doubt.
I didn't know if I would either. I didn't know if I would either.
Axis says, which feels exactly like I don't know if I love you anymore. I lose control for a moment, and the Apache rattles in bad air, and the tail slews until I stop thinking and bring everything back under control in a burst of rage.
You're done?
I whisper into the helmet. I have never even thought about this before. I am cold, sweat soaked, and shivering with adrenaline come down, drawn out like a tendon in high heels, a just off the dance floor feeling, post voracious, satisfied. Why would we choose anything else? Why would we give this up? When it feels so good to do it? When I love it so much?
I just have questions.
The tactical channel processes the sound of Axis swallowing into a dull point of sound, like dropped plastic.
We don't need to wonder, Axis. We're gendered for the mission. We can't do this forever.
Axis says, startling me. I raise the collective and hop us up 100 feet so I do not plow us into the desert.
We're not going to be like this forever. The world won't be like this forever. I can't think of myself as always this.
Yes, we will be this way forever. We survived this mission as we survive everywhere on this hot and hostile Earth, by bending all of what we are to the task. And if we use less than all of ourselves to survive, we die.
Are you going to put me on report?
Axis whispers. On report as a flight risk? As a faulty component in a mission-critical system?
You just intercepted an air-to-air missile with the autocannon, Axis. Would I ever get rid of you? Because I'm useful.
Axis says softly.
Because I can still do what I'm supposed to do. That's what you love. But if I couldn't, I'm distracting you. I'll let you fly.
I spare one glance for the gray helmet in the cockpit below mine. Politeness is a gendered protocol. Who speaks and who listens? Who denies need and who claims it? As a woman, I would have pressed access. As a woman, I would have unpacked the unease and the disquiet. As an attack helicopter, whose problems are communicated in brief, clear datums, I should, I should ignore access. But who was ever only one thing?
If you want to be someone else,
I say,
someone who doesn't do what we do, then I don't want to be the thing that stops you. Bird's gotta learn sometime,
Axis says.
doesn't it?
In the applied constructive gender briefing, they told us that there have always been liminal genders, places that people passed through on their way to something somewhere else. Who are we in those moments when we break our own rules? The straight man who sleeps with men? The woman who can't decide if what she feels is intense admiration or sexual attraction? Where do we go? Who do we become? Did you know that instability is one of the most vital traits of a combat aircraft? Civilian planes are built stable, hard to turn, inclined to run straight ahead on an even level. But a military aircraft is built so it wants to tumble out of control, and it is held steady only by constant automatic feedback, the way I am holding this Apache steady now. Something that is unstable is ready to move, eager to change. It wants to turn, to dive, to tear away from stillness and fly. Dynamism requires instability. Instability requires the possibility of change.
Voice recorder's off, right?
Axis asks.
Always. I love doing this. I love doing it with you. I just don't know if it's right. Thank you.
I say.
Barb? Thank you for thinking about whether it's right. Someone needs to.
Maybe what Axis feels is a necessary new queerness, one which pries the tool of gender back from the hands of the state and the economy and the war. I like that idea. I cannot think of myself as a failure, as something wrong, a perversion of a liberty that past generations fought to gain. But Axis can, and maybe you can too. That skepticism is not what I need, but it is necessary anyway. I have tried to show you what I am. I have tried to do it without judgment. That I leave to you.
Are we gonna make it?
Axis asks quietly. The airframe shudders in crosswind. I let the vibrations develop, settle into a rhythm, and then I make my body play the opposite rhythm to cancel it out.
I don't know.
I say, which is an answer to both of Axis's questions, both of the ways our lives are in danger now.
Depends how well I fly, doesn't it? It's all you, Bob.
Axis says with absolute trust.
Take us home.
A search radar brushes across us, scatters off the gown, turns away to look in likelier places. The Apache's engine growls, eating battery, turning charge into motion. The airframe shudders again, harder, wind rising as cooling sky fights blazing ground. We are racing 150 feet above the larger Mojave, where we fight a war over some new kind of survival, and the planet we maimed grows that desert kilometer by kilometer. Our aircraft is wounded in its body and in its crew. We are propelled by disaster. We are moving swiftly. And that was I Sexually Identify as, as an Attack Helicopter by Isabel Fall. Which, for what it's worth, I think is a pretty baller short story. I love the ideas that are presented in this. I love the setting. I think the setting is this reasonable extrapolation of a bunch of ideas that have been bouncing around. I mean, you've got the desertification happening. Uh, you've got the fallout of that, climate change. You've got fancy new military technology that makes you a better aircraft pilot or military machine. And it changes how you identify as your gender. It's so here's what I think about Isabel Fall writing this story. So this person is well read. This person knows how to write in a very compelling manner. Um, this person has read your Cory Doctorow's. This person has read your some Peter Watts probably, because there's some stuff that feels like a dead ringer, except for the lack of the use of the word aliquot. This she's read some Alastair Reynolds. So it's like this kind of, it's this dark, it's this edgy, punchy sci-fi that we've been getting occasionally from certain parts of the sci-fi world. And for me, it just nails it. So full disclosure, I am cishet male. And so this is kind of an eye opener. I have had non heteronormative friends. I have not recommended this story to many of them. Um, Partly because of reasons we'll get into later. But yeah, so it's I think it's pretty wild. I think it's quite well written. I think it's this person has a definite career in science fiction. If they started releasing books, I would be buying them. Full stop. Uh, I thoroughly enjoy this short story. I think some of the lines it uses are some real. There's some really good zingers in here. Where was the? I keep trying to find some of the zingers that really get to me. Like the discussion of gender networking in our brains and having that retooled for another purpose. It makes sense. It makes sense. Where are you? I tried to mentally mark where on the scroll bar it was, but that's not perfectly accurate. I know it was before that. Just kind of the comparing, and just kind of the window, the insight um, as to just comparing the thought process. It's like, okay, yeah, let's take the idea of sexually identifying as an attack helicopter, which started as this slight from people of a certain ideology. Um, to be like, oh, these people are ridiculous. Oh, I sexually identify as you can do. Well, I sexually identify as an attack helicopter. It's the silliest thing I can think of. Well, it takes that idea and then totally owns it. Totally owns it. And then like utterly recontextualizes that entire thing. And it's I think it's brilliant. I think it's beautiful. I think it's they were, as we'll learn, they were speaking from the heart, and it shows. Um, I thoroughly enjoy it. I think the line about Soviet Russian women, uh, and if that is not enough to convince you that gender grows deep, that gender grows deep enough to thrive in war. When the war ended, the Soviet women were punished. They went unmarried and unrespected. They were excluded from the victory parades. They had violated their gender to fight for the state, and the state judged that violation worth punishment more than their heroism was worth reward. Gender is stronger than war. It remains when all else flees. Lines like that are just killer because it's like, yeah, it's a big part of our identity. I think if you're, what social traditions and customs expect you to be, it's hard to acknowledge that how important it is when you aren't the same thing. And, I knew that, I think, on a conscious level. This really helped articulate that in interesting ways that really worked for me. Um, it's killer. It's this short, near future military sci-fi tale. It's got cool ideas, stuff that's believable but not totally out there. I like the way that the management AIs of a gated community equivalent uh, basically have seceded from the Union of the United States. I think that's brilliant. It's horrible. It's funny in the worst possible way because it's like, yeah, that would totally happen. It's so yeah. So that's me. Things I don't think work as well. Some of the prose is a little. There's a couple run-on sentences that are a little rough to get through reading aloud, but that's not necessarily a writing problem. It's a reading it aloud problem. So I think it's fairly cool. I can understand why people would take one look at it and be immediately offended before even reading it. I have a harder time understanding why someone would get through it, how someone could get through it all the way, even of a certain ideological bent, and then be with that opening feeling and then still feel upset about it. Because looking at the title, I'm like, oh boy, someone's about to say some things that are going to be really unpleasant and kind of anti-human. It's like, no, no, actually, this is kind of like a what's the word I'm looking for here? A manifesto. It's kind of like a manifesto, being like, okay, okay, okay. How about this? I posit, and thus the short story happens. It's smart. I feel it is clever. I feel it's good. I feel more people should read it. And I certainly feel that what came of it, the backlash, was not, was completely disproportionate. So I have two articles queued up here that I'm going to go through, and this is going to wind up running long because the short story is longer than I remembered. It is not as short as I recalled. It's fairly beefy. I forget how many pages it is. I could have told you if my PDF was working, but it's not. Um, so it's good. Uh, so these two articles are longish. One is from theoutline.com called What's the Harm in Reading by Gretchen Felker Martin, or Martine. And the other is from Vox.com, How Twitter Can Ruin a Life by Emily St. James. And I would like to read both of those. And these are both kind of taking apart the what happened after the story. So if people are watching this after the fact, please, I'm happy for you to post comments. Um, Post what you feel about the story. Try to just talk about the story and what works and what doesn't work for you. I'd also say please don't cancel me over this. But reading this before I'm going to be gone for like 2 weeks is probably a mistake because I'm not going to be able to. I'm not going to be around to check to see if my account's been banned. This is going to get interesting. Oh boy. Well, anyway, let's get to the shorts. Let's get to the articles here. The first one's pretty short. The second one is longer. They both have pretty cool cover art. I'm not sure where the cover art's from, but they look pretty rad. Like, look at that! Look at that! Patchy just sitting there with the sun rising, looking like a killing machine. Like this is like this. This is a cover I'd put on the short story if it was put into a book. It's just like pitch perfect. So yeah, so there is fallout from all this. Fair warning. Some of these articles have some of the comments written. I am going to read them, and you can make your decision on whether they actually read the short story or not. Some of them did, but I don't know if they all read them. This is going to involve some larger name or more popular names in the sci-fi community. This may change your opinion of them as it did for me. I try to have an open mind. I try to give people the benefit of the doubt, but when you don't do that, it's harder for me to do that. All right. So give me a sec here to get another slug of water in me, and we'll get yeah. Again, I'll state that I do not share the views of the authors of the articles, or the views of the authors of the articles do not necessarily reflect my views. They kind of do, but I'm just reading it aloud. I think if people are long-time listeners, they may have gotten a sense of what my particular ideologies are on the matter. I think people should largely be allowed to do what they want to do in this sort of situation, and if it's your identity, then it's you, right? I'm not going to tell you not to be you unless you're a narcissistic sociopath. Please don't do that. I'm not happy about that behavior. I have preferences. Do I swing this particular way? No. Do I commiserate and empathize? Oh, that was the other good line. What was it? Control F frag. That's right. We are here to degrade and destroy strategic targets in the United States of America's war against the Pear Mesa Budget Committee. If you disagree with the war, so be it. I ask your empathy, not your sympathy. How many people who read this caught that? Save your pity for the poor legislators who had to find some constitutional framework for declaring war against a credit union. Hardy har har. Okay, article time. I think y'all should just generally be. I mean, what do I end like every stream with? Be decent to each other. So I think it's fairly clear what my position on all of this largely is. Do how you do. What's the harm in reading? The controversy that erupted over a recent sci-fi short story by Isabel Fall raises questions about how we encounter difficult art. By Gretchen Felker Martin or Martin. On the first day of the new year, New Jersey-based monthly speculative fiction magazine Clarkesworld published its 160th issue, which contained a story titled I Sexually Identify as an Attack Helicopter. By then unknown writer Isabel. Okay, let's separate that into two sentences. Why am I having a hard time today? Which contained a short story titled I Sexually Identify as an Attack Helicopter by then unknown writer Isabel Fall. The story, which follows a helicopter pilot fused by brainwashing and gender reassignment surgery to her combat aircraft, deals with the themes of gender identity, the militarization of the body, and personal identity in a world collapsing under the weight of imperialism and climate change. Initial responses from readers were positive, but on January 11, things took a hostile turn. Readers like Amanda, whose comment is pictured below, expressed their belief that with its focus on a fictitious gender, the story was intended as an anti-trans joke or hoax. Others criticized its protagonist's views of gender and what they saw as the story's cisnormativity and edginess. It is edgy, but it's edgy with a point. I agree with that. So here are some comments. I'm glad that this article um, did these as screen captures because the comment section you can't readily get at anymore, nor can you get at some of the Twitter feeds or threads that we're going to touch on later. This entire story read like a long, mean joke about gender identity, and the over the top comments are confirming that. Gross. That's from Amanda. Beth Smith wrote, the stereotypical portrayal of gender, the use of male as default, and the awkward, painful-sounding sex scene thrown in apparently for titillation undermine any message about cyborg identities that it might otherwise have carried off. The story attempts to set up heterosexual cis-normative identities as queer, thus participating in a conservative political enterprise and not particularly artfully. By being coy about its goal and co-opting the language of those the story seeks to undermine, it mostly reads as slimy and smug. They did not read the story, I do not think, or missed certain key details. Daphne wrote, poorly written and patronizing, makes annoying assumptions about what the reader is thinking and revels in being edgy around sensitive political topics. All in all, an utterly tedious read, though I'm sure it will get loads more attention than it deserves, since the author is clearly banking on it being controversial. I mean, that title makes this painfully obvious before one even begins reading, and is leaning on the technical jargon to make half-baked ideas sound potentially smart to the ignorant, and couldn't be bothered to spend any time or effort on learning how to write fiction. I feel embarrassed for your editors. I mean, I feel embarrassed for editors all the time, so I guess that's fair. Rita wrote, everyone's experience is different, and there are many ways to approach and explore gender issues. This is one of the most provocative ones I've seen, but not in a constructive way. It is provocative for the heck of it, without depth or knowledge, and that makes it harmful for some readers, including this one. I read it, and it left me feeling trolled. The Nazi imagery / coding may be unintentional, but coupled with that title, the when I was a woman stuff and the brutal gender stereotypes, taken all together, it was a deeply unpleasant experience, one that I never wish to repeat. Within hours, the controversy spread to Reddit and Twitter. Some complaints centered the centered the perceived transphobia inherent in the story's title, which had been taken from a common transphobic right-wing meme originating in the mid-2010s. More prominent figures in the science fiction and fantasy community began to weigh in. On January 13th, the story was removed from Clark's World. A note posted in its stead stated that Fall had asked for its removal and was personally distraught. After the story was taken down, Erin Dembo, a cis woman and president of Canada's National Association for Speculative fiction professionals, spoke out against the story in harsh terms in a Twitter thread that has since been deleted. The writing about gender transition, about life and sex as a woman, and about PTSD-like reactions in women feels flat and fake, like the take on gender theory that you would achieve by spending a half hour on Wikipedia, not the take you might achieve by reading actual novels and memoirs by real trans folk, or even by cis women, for that matter. So, something that's going to become clear later is a little word called irony, and we'll get into that. Dembo went on further to speculate that, based on its tone and content, a cis man had written the story. Fall's bio on Clark's World included only her birth year, 1988, and her name, not her gender identity. Weekly speculative fiction magazine Strange Horizons editor-in-chief Vanessa Rose Finn claimed in a Twitter thread that the story was a harmful failure, its removal commendable. In a statement following the story's removal, Clark's World owner and editor-in-chief Neil Clark confirmed that Fall was a transgender woman living a closeted life and that harassment had forced her to out herself. Clark also stated that Fall's deteriorating health and well-being, as well as her acute distress over criticisms of her story as harmful, prompted her request for the story's removal. So, this article does a pretty good job of covering some things after this. I'm not going to interject too much commentary. I'm trying not to, because I'm reading this and my blood is boiling again for like the fourth time, and I'm just like, God damn it. Okay, and it's one of the reasons I chose this article because it brings up a series of fairly good questions and statements. Okay. But what does harm mean in the context of a short story posted on a magazine's website? That art can upset, disgust, and even trigger is a given. But a reader's pain is no more an author's responsibility than the tragic Slender Man stabbing was the fault of Eric Knudsen, the fictional entity's creator. Artists can no more control how people feel while engaging with their work than they can prevent its egregious misinterpretation, two things which often go hand in hand. But it is one thing to critique a work on art with a misguided eye. It is another thing to critique it without actually engaging with it, which is where the attack helicopter discourse truly goes off the rails. On January 17th, commenting on Fall's decision to withdraw in a now deleted Twitter thread, the best-selling science fiction and fantasy author N.K. Jemisin said that she was glad the story was taken down, stating, "Not all art is good art. Sometimes art causes harm. And granted that marginalized creators end up held to a higher standard than others, which is shit, but that's because we know what that harm feels like, up close and personal. Artists should strive to do no more of this harm." She also noted that the author's extreme stress and its health effects as part of the harm Attack Helicopter had caused. In subsequent tweets, however, Jemisin admitted that she hadn't read the story. So here's screen grabs of the Jemisin tweets. Finally caught up on the helicopter story at Clark's World. Plenty of trans and NB, non-binary folks have expressed themselves on the matter, and their viewpoints should be centered. But if anyone needs to hear it, I'm glad the story was taken down by its author. Not all art is good art, sometimes art causes harm, and granted that marginalized creators end up held to a higher standard than others, which is shit, but that's because we know what that harm feels like, up close and personal. Artists should strive to do no more of this harm. And I say this as someone who's done harmful things before, and will end up doing them again despite my best efforts. It's easy to fuck up. Everyone does it eventually. You gotta fix it, though, as best you can. Or if you can't, learn and do better next time. Right. The violent and oftentimes ironically ignorant backlash against Fall's story sheds light on a troublingly regressive, entitled, and puritanical trend in the relationship between artists and their audiences, particularly when it comes to genre fiction. Readers appear to feel a need to cast their objections to fiction in moral terms, positioning themselves as protectors of the downtrodden. Trans writer Phoebe Barton went so far as to compare Fall's story to a gun, which could be used only to inflict harm. Though in a later tweet, she, like Jemison, admitted she hadn't read it and had based her reaction solely on its title. Phoebe Barton said, I sexually identify as an attack helicopter is a meme. It was built for a specific purpose, to mock and to hurt. Think of it as a gun. A gun only has one use, for hurting. Many reactions to Fall's story, for all that they come from nominal progressives, fit neatly into a puritanical mold, attacking it as hateful towards transness, fundamentally evil for depicting a trans person committing murder, or else as material that right-wing trolls could potentially use to smear trans people as ridiculous. Each analysis positioned the author as at best thoughtless and at worst hateful, while her attackers are cast as righteous. In such a way of thinking, art is not a sensual or aesthetic experience, but a strictly moral one. It's every instance either fundamentally good or evil. This provides aggrieved parties an opportunity to feel righteousness in attacking transgressive art, positioning themselves as protectors of imagined innocence or of ideals under attack. Further, the idea that minorities must be represented in a uniformly positive light is an old and pernicious one, inextricably linked to the idea of the model minority, which holds that every member of a minority demographic is an ambassador to the mainstream and must behave unimpeachably. In this instance, it led to cis critics like Jemison denouncing the story as transphobic based solely on its title, ironically stifling a transgender voice. Some fans even appear to believe that art's purpose is essentially instructional, that it should communicate moral lessons to its audience, like a Goofus and Gallant strip. Oh, taking me back to the highlights days. Art that features transgression, think of Nabokov's Lolita and the ongoing perception that it functions as a handbook for pedophiles, is often seen as endorsing that transgression and encouraging its spread in real life. So, for anyone who doesn't know what Goofus and Gallant is, or Gallant, so Highlights magazine, and it probably has been in other magazines too. You have Goofus and Gallant, and it's a moral parable. Goofus is a constant, inveterate fuck up, and everything he does is fucking wrong. And Gallant is not. He does everything right. So, um, for example, Gallant takes off the air sealing lid of the peanut butter jar and then removes it so other people and mix and stirs the peanut butter so that other people can enjoy the peanut butter later. Goofus, on the other hand, uh, will, I don't know, like throw peanut butter everywhere and then leave the jar open so nobody can eat peanut butter because it's gone bad or stale. I don't know why I chose peanut butter. Because it occurs to me that peanut butter is a big thing in America and not so much anywhere else. So insert perishable food stuff here. Mayonnaise. I don't know. Um, Whatever. I think I'm outing myself somehow, but I think I've already done that repeatedly, so whatever. Um, so it's moral parables. The rhetorical and sometimes actual violence with which this belief is enforced, in spite of the lack of evidence behind it, lends its proponents a great deal of online clout. By nature, such eruptions of rage, occurring largely on social media and involving persons of widely varying levels of prominence, are difficult to track, but examples like falls achieve a critical mass upon which they become visible to a broader audience. It was only last year author Amelie Wen Zhao withdrew her debut novel from pre-publication over online outrage over its perceived racist themes. A full decade of highly publicized moralistic opposition to the blockbuster television program Game of Thrones has helped to further mainstream such conflicts. The show's depictions of rape and other forms of sexual violence drew frequent assertions that even portraying such actions equated to endorsing them. That someone reacts with hurt to art doesn't make that art dangerous, and claiming that all art that's capable of causing pain is inherently toxic. Oh, okay, I misread that line. That someone reacts with hurt to art doesn't make that art dangerous, and claiming that all art that's capable of causing pain is inherently toxic is a solipsistic nightmare in which a reader's personal experience becomes an act of violence committed against them by an author whom they very likely do not know. It's a reflexive model of critique, a rejection of evaluating art on its own merits. In a way, it takes the place of criticism entirely, ignoring aesthetic concerns in favor of moral ones. Perhaps in that emotional reaction is some trace of readers reliving their own trauma, and casting the artist in the role of an attacker or abuser, reimagining it as a scenario in which they can stop that violation from happening. It's a poignant thought. Who among us wouldn't want to protect our younger selves, or hypothetical children who remind us of ourselves, from life's nettles and pitfalls? It also locks us in our memories. It also locks us in memories of our pain. Okay, let's try that sentence again. Sorry. It also locks us in memories of our own pain and reduces art to something strictly individual, cutting away its ability to let us experience the lives and dreams of people we'll never know. Stories like Attack Helicopter are vital to unpacking the webs of intersecting forces which make up every human consciousness. They constitute an outlet for the suffering of marginalized artists raised in bigoted, imperialist cultures, a way to process the poison we're spoon fed from birth into something that awakens and lays bare. Calls for the destruction or censorship of such stories constitute a rejection of life's intrinsic complexity, a retreat into the black and white moral absolutism of adolescence, or theocracy. These rigid moral strictures strip marginalized communities of their full humanity and of their history as makers of painful, difficult art stemming from their experiences as outsiders. They rob audiences of the space and tools necessary to engage art thoughtfully and in good faith. They make our world a poorer, harsher place, clannish and merciless, and smother beauty in its cradle. I basically agree with most of that. I think they use some fraught language in parts in the article, but I basically agree with what they're saying. Is it's like somebody wrote this. It's a piece of fiction. God damn it. It could be. I'm not saying like it's entirely possible for things to be harmful, but that's like for art to be harmful. But it's kind of like eating. This is going to be a horrible analogy, and someone's going to hold my feet to the fire over this later, but this is the best I can come up with off the top of my head. It's like eating spicy peppers in food. Technically, you're poisoning yourself, but it adds value. And maybe you never eat peppers again. That's fine. Maybe they're too maybe they're too spicy. That's fine. That's totally fine. You never eat that pepper again. You eat a mushroom. You hate that mushroom. Never eating that mushroom again. But you've expanded yourself. You now have more detail, more granularity to your character or something. I realized that that could be conflated with me saying, "Oh, well, abuse is character building," and that's obviously it builds character. That's obviously not what I'm trying to say because that's like not okay. Oh, well, my dad beat me. It should be fine. And look how I turned out, sort of thing. It's like, no, that logic doesn't hold necessarily. Anyway, it's like divine and goat innards. It's just like, okay. So I'm going to go back and read some of the comments that have been posted. I have not read them, all of them yet. Let's see. All in the name of evolution. Geez, why can't these people appreciate honesty? Yep. Sounds like some like smelling their own farts too much. Yep. It's all part of the culture war, an attack on art, tradition, and cultural institution. I can hardly stand the outrage. Let's call Jordan Peterson. Yikes. This smacks of that critical race theory bullshit. It kind of does. To me, I think there is massive overlap in the sense that it is saying, okay, there's this in some way reminds me or embodies something that is part of something I don't like. So I'm going to automatically crap on it and say that this is bad, this is the worst thing to happen. I mean, like either side of whatever ideological divide you choose to have, or not choose, as the case may be, you might be brainwashed into it. It might be your gender. Uh, bad frag, bad frag. Um, Actually, I wouldn't be totally surprised if people do identify uh, as an internet troll by now. That probably is a thing now, and people might not realize it yet. I'm getting off topic here. It's very similar. Like it's like okay, yeah, you've got crazy people on one side, you've got crazy people on the other. Either extreme is bad, but they're basically thinking in a lot of the same way. Jay Waldrop says here, it's performative allyship at its worst. Help trans people by checks notes, bullying them online until they take down their story. Yeah, no, it's pretty silly. And the Vox article is going to go into a bit more detail on Isabel Fall. Uh, so we'll get to that. I'd love to have conversations with Isabel Fall, like mostly about her short story and how great it was, but also, I mean, then again, it's kind of like Peter Watts. Peter Watts is always baffled that people say, he'd be exhausting to be around for a while, but I'd like to hang out. He'd be fun to hang out with for a while. And he's like, I don't really get why people believe this. And it's like, okay, yeah, maybe. But at the same time, it's like, I find this person kind of fascinating. And I think more exposure to fascinating things is not a bad thing. New experiences can be good. So, next article. And this is going to cover a lot of the same territory. Some of the tweets are going to get brought up again, and a few other things. This one's a bit longer as well, uh, so expect this to go for like another hour. I am not, by the way, shilling. What was the first one? The Outline or Vox, because they're not paying me money. I'm just saying these two specific articles. Yeah, but to ignore it is crazy, and pretend it doesn't exist is exactly. No, that's the problem. At some point, I really, really, really want to read this short story by Peter Watts. I know it all comes back to Watts, uh, about somebody who is tasked with fixing things and how they go about fixing things. It's grim. So give me one sec here. Sure thing. Thank you to everybody who's tuning in. I imagine this is probably going to be one of my more viewed videos. I'm not doing this for the popularity. I'm doing this because I meant to do it 2 years ago when I first learned this was a thing that had happened. Because I was outraged. I was utterly outraged. I was like, I cannot believe this person. Because so I hear about, oh, this person's been like blacklisted. They had to take down their short story, and so automatically I'm like, oh, it's gone. Now I need to read it. So I go and I read it, and then I read about the fallout, and I'm just like, wait, what? Wait a minute. They're they're trans? Okay. So they were speaking from the heart. I was moved. I thought it was a really cool story. That adds a whole nother layer to it all. And then like I'm reading the things that people were saying, and I'm just like, I can not believe you people. The thing that's really frustrating is I don't believe that N.K. Jemisin and most of these other people have walked back what they've said at all. Like the most walking back most of them did was say, "Oh, well, I never read the thing." So it's like, then why did you open your stupid mouth or fingers, as the case may be? I'm an opinion-hated sack of shit sometimes. I realize that, but I try to be, well, okay, that was before I knew this, and then I'm going to change. I'm going to grow, or try anyway, and not just around the waist. How Twitter Can Ruin a Life. Isabel Fall's sci-fi story, I Sexually Identify as an Attack Helicopter, drew the ire of the internet. This is what happened next. I should also note when these were written. This article, so the short story was written in 2020, beginning of 2020. This article was written less than a month later in 2020, and this article was written a year and 6 months after the short story was written. This article is by Emily St. James. In a war zone, it is not safe to be unknown. Unknown travelers are shot on sight, says Isabel Fall. The fact that Isabel Fall was an unknown led to her death. Isabel Fall isn't dead. There is a person who wrote under that name alive on the planet right now, someone who published a critically acclaimed, award-nominated short story. If she wanted to publish again, she surely could. Isabel Fall is a ghost, nonetheless. In January 2020, not long after her short story, I Sexually Identify as an Attack Helicopter, was published in the online science fiction magazine Clarkesworld, Fall asked her editor to take the story down, and then checked into a psychiatric ward for thoughts of self-harm and suicide. The story, and especially its title, which co-opts a transphobic meme, had provoked days of contentious debate within the science fiction community, the trans community, and the community of people who worry that cancel culture has run amok. Because there was little biographical information available about its author, the debate hinged on one question. Who was Isabel Fall? And that question ate her alive. When she emerged from the hospital a few weeks later, the world had moved on, but she was still scarred by what had happened. She decided on something drastic. She would no longer be Isabel Fall. As a trans woman early in transition, Fall had the option of retreating to the relative safety of her legal, masculine identity. That's what she did, staying out of the limelight and growing ever more frustrated by what had happened to her. She bristles when I ask her in an email if she's stopped transitioning, but it's the only phrase I can think of to describe how the situation appears. Isabel Fall was on a path to becoming herself, and then she wasn't. And all because she published a short story. And then her life fell apart. In the 18 months since, what happened to her has become a case study for various people who want to talk about the way we live today. It has been held up as an example of progressives eating their own, of the dangers of online anonymity, of the need for sensitivity readers or content warnings. But what this story really symbolizes is the fact that as we've grown more adept at using the internet, we've also grown more adept at destroying people's lives, but from a distance, in an abstracted way. Sometimes the path to your personal hell is paved with other people's best intentions. Like most internet outrage cycles, the fracas over I Sexually Identify as an Attack Helicopter was enormous news within the bubble of people who cared about it, and barely made a blip outside that bubble. The full tale is amorphous and weird, and recounting its ins and outs is nearly impossible to do here. Just trying to explain the motivations of all involved is a task in and of itself, and at any rate, that story has been told many times, quoting others extensively. I forget which this article links to. I'll worry about that later. I might read that one. Quoting others extensively, Fall has never spoken publicly about the situation until now, in June of 2021. Clark's World published Fall's story on January 1, 2020. For a while, people seemed to like it. I was in awe of it on a sentence level. I thought it was beautiful and devastating and incredibly subversive and surprising. It did all this work in a very short amount of space, which I found completely breathtaking. It had been a long time since I had read a short story that I had enjoyed and that had also rewired my brain a little bit, said Arthur Carmen Maria Machado, who read the story before controversy had broken out. Pretty much my opinion, almost to the word, by the way. In the first 10 days after Attack Helicopter was published, what muted criticism existed was largely confined to the story's comments section on Clark's World. The tweets that still exist from that period were largely positive responses to the story, often from trans people. But first in Clark's World's comments, and then later on Twitter, the combination of the story's title and the relative lack of information about Fall began to fuel a growing paranoia around the story and its author. The presence of trolls who seemed to take the story's title at face value only added to that paranoia. And when read through the lens of Isabel Fall is trolling everybody, Attack Helicopter started to seem menacing to plenty of readers. Attack Helicopter was a slippery, naughty piece of fiction that captured a particular trans feminine uncertainty better than almost anything I have ever read. Set in a nightmarish future in which the US military has co opted gender to the degree that it turns recruits into literal weapons, it told the story of Barb, a pilot whose gender is helicopter. Together with Axis, Barb's gunner, who was also assigned helicopter, Barb carried out various missions against assorted opposition forces who live within what is at present the United States. Then, because its title was also a transphobic meme, and because Isabel Fall had absolutely no online presence beyond the Clark's World story, many people began to worry that Fall was somehow a front for right-wing anti-trans reactionaries. They expressed those fears in the comments of the story, in various science fiction discussion groups, and all over Twitter. Fans of the story pushed back, saying it was a bold and striking piece of writing from an exciting new voice. While the debate was initially among trans people for the most part, it eventually spilled over to cis sci-fi fans who boosted the concerns of trans people who were worried about the story. Neil Clark, Clark's World's editor, pulled the story on Fall's behalf on January 15, replacing it with an editorial note that read, in part, "The recent barrage of attacks on Isabel have taken a toll, and I ask that even if you disagree with the decision, that you respect it. This is not censorship. She needed this to be done for her own personal safety and health." Fall, reeling, checked into the hospital. She has since retitled her story Helicopter Story, and under that title it was nominated for a 2021 Hugo Award, one of the most prestigious honors in science fiction. How do I feel about the nomination? I don't know, Fall says by email. It's a nice validation to know that some people like the story enough to nominate it, but it's also dreadful to know that this will just mean reopening the conversation, which will lead to a lot of people being hurt. I started emailing with Fall in February, just over a year after Attack Helicopter blew up. I had been working on a completely different piece about the short story and wanted to invite her to share her version of events, which thus far have been defined by voices that are not her own. Clark put me in touch with Fall, and she agreed to speak with me on the condition that we only correspond over email. I am the first journalist she has talked to about what happened. I do not know her legal identity, but I have confirmed that she is the person who wrote Attack Helicopter, from looking at earlier drafts of the story that Fall shared with me. When Fall published Attack Helicopter, she was not yet ready to be publicly out as a trans woman, but hoped that writing it for a niche publication in a community that is frequently friendly to queer writers would be a good way to get her feet wet. She had at least some reason to expect that the complete vacuum of personal information about her, the short author bio attached to the story said only that she was born in 1988, wouldn't be questioned. Trans spaces, both online and in real life, have a long history of allowing an anonymity that paradoxically hides within one's true identity. If you want to attend a support group meeting and say your name is Isabel and you use she/her pronouns, you will be treated as such, no matter how you look or what name is on your driver's license. Gatekeeping in a trans space usually involves loosely enforced rules that focus on giving those who exist within them a safe place to explore their identity. Those rules almost never attempt to determine that someone is trans enough. But anonymity isn't always welcome on the internet, where an anonymous identity can be weaponized for the worst. That gap between the good faith anonymity assumed in trans spaces and the bad faith anonymity increasingly assumed online was the one Fall wandered into. Nice ad for. Can I turn that off? There we go. Much better. Why would I want that on? That's why I don't like reading articles on the internet. I sexually identify as an attack helicopter is a copy pasta, a snippet of text that is copied and pasted across the internet, sometimes with alterations, sometimes word for word, that dates to 2014. It most likely originated on the forums of the game Team Fortress 2 before making its way to Reddit and 4chan, where it became a meme used to mock and demean trans people who spoke earnestly about their experiences and identities. The meme is transphobic on its face because it suggests that one's gender can be decided on a whim. Fall's story tries to take the meme seriously. What would it be like if your gender was actually helicopter? As a story, I sexually identify as an attack helicopter explores three separate but interconnected ideas: gender as an innate part of the self, gender as a performance for society, and gender as a literal weapon of the state. The story's complicated exploration of gender identity doesn't work for everyone, but it hits others with almost laser-targeted precision. At its core, Attack Helicopter is about the intersection of gender and American hegemony. On that level, it has plenty to say, even to cisgender people. After all, if all gender is on some level a performance, and it is, then it can be co-opted and perverted by the state. But if it's also innate on some level, and it is, then we are powerless against whatever it is that enough people decide gender performance should look like. We are constantly trapped by gender, even when we know we are trapped by it. You can't truly escape something so all-pervasive. You can only negotiate your own terms with it, and everybody's terms are different. The conversation around gender is dominated by those who can tolerate and thrive in it. It is conducted by the voices of those who are able to survive speech and its consequences, Fall says. But it is a conversation that is, by necessity, reductive. We need teams and groups and identities, not just to belong to, but as mental objects to manipulate and wield. If we tried to hold 10 million unique experiences of gender in our mind, they would sift through our fingers and roll away. Jesus. Too many ads, I'm telling you. Such a conversation around gender is not particularly conducive to those who are figuring out their gender in public, as all trans people must do eventually. It's especially not conducive to artists who are exploring their gender in their art, under even greater degrees of public scrutiny. Which is to say, that conversation is not conducive to people like Fall. We make boxes that seem to enclose a satisfying number of human experiences, and then we put labels on those and argue about them instead, she says. The boxes change over time, according to a process which is governed by, as far as I can tell, the cycles of human suffering. We realize that forcing people into the last set of boxes was painful and wrong. We wring our hands, we wring our hands, we fold up some new boxes, and assure ourselves that this time we got it right, or at least right enough for now. Because we need the boxes to argue over. I do not want to be in a box. I want to sift through your fingers, to vanish, to be unseen. The question many people asked when Attack Helicopter was published was, what were Fall's intentions in borrowing a transphobic meme for her title? When it came out in 2018, the Attack Helicopter meme had already mostly been ironically reclaimed by trans people, who had undercut its sting by, in essence, shouting, "Get better material" at transphobes. To wit, and there's a copy of a comic here. There's a TERF saying, "I identify as an attack helicopter." The trans community, "Boo, get better material." Ellipsis, well, all their material is attack helicopter. So I guess they do identify as an attack helicopter. Whoops, I closed the wrong window. Shit. No! One sec. I knew I would do this. It's fine. I have backups. Oh my goodness, I can't believe we're having to do this in the middle of reading the thing. Reopen close tab. There we go. Much better. Again, don't use Microsoft Edge much. For good reason. It's kind of crap. There we go. Oh my gosh, the ads are popping up everywhere. Stop it. We make boxes that seem to enclose the yes. Ah, here we go. I do not, to wit, Fall was channeling that ironic reclamation, but readers were quick to jump to their own conclusions. Many only read as far as the title before assuming Fall was either transphobic herself or a trans person intentionally using the meme to make a point. Why is there so much Target advertisement? I can't remember the last time I was in a Target. Sorry. Fall was either transphobic herself or a trans person intentionally using the meme to make a point. All they had to go on was one biographical detail. Isabel Fall was born in 1988. There was no Isabel Fall Twitter profile. She had never published fiction before. She was a blank space upon which anyone could project their worst fears or biggest hopes. When the story was first published, we knew nothing about Isabel Fall's identity, and there was a smattering of strange behavior around the comments and who was linking to it that led people to suspect right-wing trolls were involved in this, says science fiction author Neon Yang. They were publicly critical of the story on Twitter. In hindsight, they were probably just drawn by the provocative title and possibly did not even read the story. And yes, it seems like an overreaction on the part of the trans people who responded this way, but being trans in this world is having to constantly justify your right to existence at all. And when you're forced to be on the defensive all the time, everything starts to look like an attack. Which I can get. I can understand. I can empathize. But a lot of trans women adopt an online pseudonym before coming out publicly, including me, the author of this article. Not me. Well, I'm not trans, but I do have a pseudonym online. You're never going to learn my real name. Sorry. Sorry, folks. If you know who I am, you know who I am, but you probably don't. Actually, if you do know who I am, please keep that on the down low. Thanks. To come out as a trans woman in a transphobic patriarchal society that views our existence as a curiosity at best is rarely something done at all once. Done all at once. Sorry. Let's try that paragraph again. But a lot of trans women adopt an online pseudonym before coming out publicly, including me. To come out as a trans woman in a transphobic patriarchal society that views our existence as a curiosity at best is rarely something done all at once. It requires baby steps, like becoming used to a new name that starts to feel like home. Absent any context, this writer is a secret troll seems like a huge, unjustified leap to make. Within the science fiction community specifically, it's still a huge leap, but not necessarily an unjustified one. In recent years, a neo-reactionary movement known as the Sad Puppies has advocated for politically and artistically conservative science fiction and gamed the Hugo Award nominations, drawing ire from genre writers old and new. The Sad Puppy's position is, more or less, that great sci-fi is traditional, usually focused on straight white guys in militaristic settings with straightforward prose. It's a pushback against the diversification of science fiction and fantasy writing, and though the puppy's influence has waned, the lasting effects of their efforts have only stirred up fear and uncertainty within the community. Thus, paranoia was the prevailing mood under which many read Attack Helicopter. So I was dimly aware of the Sad Puppies before this incident. I could do an entire thing on the Sad Puppies. I'm not going to because I don't believe they deserve the platform. As fascistic or authoritarian as that position may sound, if somebody is saying something that is not for the public good, deplatforming them is not necessarily a bad idea. Circumstances, specific circumstances matter. This is one of those. Let's see. A few people insisted to me that the controversy began with honest but negative readings of the story by people who felt Fall had missed the mark before mutating into something worse. One unstated assumption made here is that only trans people should write about trans experiences, and therefore Fall should have identified herself as a trans woman directly in the bio attached to the story. This notion is admirable on the surface, but fails to account for the many ways in which trans artists explore and experience their gender in what they create. Sometimes you can only figure out you're trans by writing about being trans. In criticism, you can say, "This struck me as somewhat clumsy and born from inexperience." That's a fair thing to say about art, says Gretchen Felker-Martin. We just read an article from an author and critic who says she loved Attack Helicopter. What isn't fair to say is, the person who wrote this is definitely straight and they've never met a trans person. There's some room for error there when it comes to whether the person whose work you're critiquing is some sort of famous cultural icon or something. But Isabel was not that. She's a woman writing under a pseudonym. So, like if Stephen King, for instance, who has done the pseudonym thing, were to pretend he were to write this short story, there'd be an argument to be made there. But that's not what happened. Instead, he wrote under the pseudonym Richard Bachman, I guess, to see if people would buy his books anyway, and then immediately people learned it was Stephen King anyway, and it didn't actually matter. J.K. Rowling tried the same thing, and yeah, it didn't work great until she revealed that, oh, it's me, and then everybody bought it. So it was critiqued rather harshly, as I recall, before people knew. I didn't read it though, so I'm N.K. Jemisin in this one. I don't have a horse in that race. Other than, treating people decently. Fall remembers the sequence of events differently, and so far as I have been able to figure out, her sequence of events is the correct one. Suspicion of her motives in writing Attack Helicopter spurred an almost immediate attempt to figure out her real identity, which fueled suspicion that she was trying to hide something. She was accused of being an alt-right troll or a Nazi. Only when things had gone too far did the good faith criticism start to roll in. Fall says she found some of that criticism useful, particularly with regard to the story's treatment of Barb's race. Barb is Korean. But in her telling, the good faith criticism came after the attempts to prove that she was a bad actor. By then, the damage was done. Isabel Fall, this article is the results of an interview with her over email. She has, to my knowledge, never been interviewed after this in any kind of living capacity or active one-on-one capacity, just over email with this particular author. I have not heard beyond that. Why does they think that I need Target and skincare? Framing matters. After the frame around the story was in place, it could not be shaken, and everything that happened afterwards was influenced by it, Fall says. I have also heard people say, we deserve to know if Isabel Fall is someone with a history of writing things that divide queer communities. Is it now a crime to divide a queer community? Why shouldn't a queer community? Why shouldn't queer people be divided on one issue or another? The mess very quickly turned nasty and personal, and it was happening where Fall could see all of it. I sought out and read everything written about the story. I couldn't stop, Fall says. It was like that old nightmare fantasy. What if someone gave you a ledger of everything anyone's ever said about you, anywhere? Who wouldn't read it? I would read it. I would go straight to the worst things. One criticism above all got to her, that Fall must be a cis man, because no woman would ever write the way she did. And because this criticism was so often leveled by cis women, Fall felt her gender dysphoria, the gap between her gender and her gender assigned at birth, increasing. In Fall's story, Barb and Axis destroy the lives of people they cannot even see. Now, in a bitterly ironic twist, the same was happening to her. In this story, I think that the helicopter is a closet. Where do you feel dysphoria the hardest? In the closet. Or so I have to hope. I have not been anywhere outside it, except for in publishing Attack Helicopter, which convinced me it was safer inside. Fall says. Most of all, I wanted people to say, this story was written by a woman who understands being a woman. I obviously failed horribly. That was when she asked Clark to take down the story. That was when she checked herself into a psych ward so she wouldn't kill herself in the midst of her dysphoric spiral. It ended the way it did because I thought I would die, she says. Optical Antenna says, my Google ads think that I am a Spanish speaking male homosexual. However, I am not any of those. You could be. I wouldn't know. And this is a safe space, so I don't take great pains to make it that way because I've never needed to take great pains to make it a safe space. But rest assured that you can be whatever you want to be, except for a serial killer or a pedophile. Actually, okay, there is actually a list of things you shouldn't be, and I'm not going to approve of or care or I will judge you for. But it's a short list, and they're fairly extreme. And trust and believe you meet none of those criteria, I'm fairly sure. I don't think the people I have to worry about are going to be tuning into this. So if it ever becomes a problem, and after this it might well be, fantastic. That's sarcasm, it's not great. Your Spanish sucks! Oh, so does mine. So does mine. I could fake French, if I had to. I can fake any Latin-based language, but I'd have to really work at it. Never mind. I'm by no means conversant. Let's see. Here it is. Twitter is really good at making otherwise unimportant things seem like important news. It's incredibly hard to imagine Attack Helicopter receiving the degree of blowback it did in a world where Twitter didn't exist. There were discussions of the story on forums and in comment threads all over the internet, but it is the nature of Twitter that all but ensured this particular argument would rage out of control. So, tu habla español, J. Waltrip. uh, Isabel Fall's story has been held up as an example of cancel culture run amok, but like almost all examples of cancel culture run amok, it's mostly an example of Twitter run amok. It really is a social media problem. There was this brilliant article I read on some of the ramifications of social media not so long ago, although it was, I think, an older article that I'd probably be happy to read aloud, but I won't do it because I can't remember where it was from. Okay, let's get back. It's very easy to do a paranoid reading on Twitter, says Lee Mandello, a PhD candidate at the University of Kentucky and an author and critic who writes for Tor.com. They were among the earliest advocates of Attack Helicopter, and they wrote a lengthy Twitter thread, collected as a blog post here, about paranoid versus reparative readings of art in response to Clark's World pulling the story. That might actually be one I have here, and I'm not going to have time to get around to, I don't think. Um, Ironic putting it on a Twitter thread. The delineation between paranoid and reparative readings originated in 1995 with influential critic Eve Kosofsky-Sedgwick. A paranoid reading focuses on what's wrong or problematic about a work of art. A reparative reading seeks out what might be nourishing or healing in a work of art, even if the work is flawed. Importantly, a reparative reading also tends to consider what might be nourishing or healing in a work of art for someone who isn't the reader. This kind of nuance gets completely worn away on Twitter, home of paranoid readings. You might tweet, well, they didn't discuss X, Y, or Z, so that's bad, or they didn't. In this case, discuss transness in a way that felt like what I feel about transness. Therefore, it is bad. That flattens everything into this very individual, very hostile way of reading, Mandello says. Part of reparative reading is trying to think about how a story cannot do everything. Nothing can do everything. If you're reading every text, fiction, or criticism looking for it to tick a bunch of boxes, like if it represents X, Y, and Z appropriately to my definitions of appropriate, and if it's missing any of those things, it's not good, you're not really seeing the close focus that it has on something else. Kat Lowe, a researcher whose work tracks how information and misinformation spread across social networks, explained to me that Twitter itself is as big a part of Isabel Fall's story as a faceless mob of the site's users. The sheer assault of information on Twitter makes it difficult to parse, and unlike other social networks, it doesn't really have elements that preserve any semblance of context, whereas an individual subreddit is built around a particular subject, and a Facebook feed or group is limited to posts by one's friends or organized around one topic, at least in theory. Twitter ends up organized around what Lowe calls influencer hubs. For instance, if you're a science fiction fan, you might follow a big name author or critic in the field, and since they're likely a bigger expert on the topic than you are, you'll probably regard them as such. But Twitter is a platform that rewards divisive opinions, which are more likely to drive engagement, hearts, retweets, and the like. So, many influencers with the biggest reach on Twitter are also people whose core identity is expressing divisive opinions. Where this becomes an issue is when influencers from different worlds start to cross-pollinate, which is precisely what happened with Attack Helicopter. Though much of the early discussion of the story was among trans sci-fi fans, and though much of that discussion was pretty evenly split between paranoid and reparative readings, the takes that were amplified by bigger and bigger names in the sci-fi world were almost always the paranoid ones, because those were the most divisive and most clickable. And the people elevating those paranoid takes were almost all cis. Attack Helicopter ended up stuck in a feedback loop, as cis people circulated takes skewed toward bad faith readings of Fall's story in the name of supporting trans people. Attack Helicopter went from a story that people were debating to a story that was perceived as one trans people had few qualms with to one that was perceived as actively harming trans people, almost entirely because of how Twitter functions. I like how the ads aren't there and then pop up later. This is another problem of using Edge because I can't get it to look at any other browser for some reason. OBS isn't playing nice. Otherwise, I would be using literally any other browser that actually has ad protection block. We wouldn't be seeing this. I am so sorry. Once a Twitter conversation takes off like this, it becomes very difficult to stop, which leads to stranger and stranger levels of binary thinking and gatekeeping. I found two tweets posted within hours of each other where one insisted Fall must be a cis man and the other insisted she must be a cis woman. Both were sure she was mocking trans people. Once a Twitter controversy has reached that critical mass, once a Twitter controversy has reached that critical mass is usually when you might start reading about it in the media. What's on Twitter extends far beyond Twitter because people make Twitter relevant to the rest of the world. So, in a sense, they're reproducing the chaos and social structure of Twitter by bringing them into the rest of the world, Lowe says. It ends up having outsized influence because the people who are on Twitter perceive Twitter as being bigger and more representative of the world than it really is. Remind me to, or rather remind me not to, go on my diatribe of how certain large media organizations seem to have basically become Twitter reposters in a lot of ways. Some have gotten better and some have not. So that ties into the outsized reach that Twitter conversations have. By the time it was pulled, I Sexually Identify as an Attack Helicopter had been read by tens of thousands of people, according to Clark, though its ultimate audience is impossible to total because archived versions of the story and pirated PDFs reached countless others. Hello. Fall also issued a limited edition ebook of the story under the title Helicopter Story last fall to qualify for an award, not the Hugo. The ebook was not nominated. In the 2 weeks that the story was online, discussion around it attracted interest, and the story amassed a wide number of fans beyond the normal sphere of science fiction short story aficionados. Many people who read it did so because it was controversial, but it only became controversial because it was so widely read. Even more people came to know Attack Helicopter as an exemplar of the left eating its own. Most of the people I talked to for this story, regardless of whether they initially criticized or praised Attack Helicopter, cited articles by established pundits, including one in The Atlantic, as supercharging the discussion. Those articles launched the discourse beyond the twin niches of online trans communities and online SFF communities and sent it swirling out into the larger internet of people vaguely interested in free speech absolutism. With every new article, a new audience of people outside of the science fiction community learned about Isabel Fall, and a new wave of anger fell on everybody involved, regardless of their position, including Fall. The Atlantic article was one I wanted to do for Variety as well, but it didn't make the cut because I realized that this, like with the two articles and the short story, it was already going to be kind of a long stream in the article. I wanted to do it as like here's a point counterpoint thing, and I didn't get around to it. You can probably you can find the Atlantic article. What's it called? The talented victim is not the point. So people can check that out on the Atlantic if they really want to. By Connor Friedsdorf. That's a name. So are lots of names. The names are all names. Okay. There were several reporters that reached out to me right after the story came down. I remember having a conversation with one of them and saying, "Is writing about this really what you want to do? I'm not going to participate. I think that this is just going to make it worse," Clark says. And they ran with it. It brought in the whole cancel culture thing. Isabel needed that story down for her, not for them, and not for anybody else, but for her. And that's why it came down. I tried to make that clear in the editor's note on the story's removal, but people still wanted that cancel narrative. Attack Helicopter was nominated for a Hugo Award, a prize for science fiction and fantasy works that is voted on by SFF fans. In April, under the title, I'm going to stutter, under the title Helicopter Story, the nomination prompted a new round of criticism, this time mostly centered on Clark and how he didn't do enough to preemptively shield Fall before the story was published. Clark says he's happy to take the responsibility, but both he and Fall insist he did everything right. Clark's World hired a sensitivity reader. The story spent far longer in the editing process than most other stories published in the magazine, and so on. Yeah, something I've come to learn vis-a-vis your comment, Warren Steele, about nobody watching, is the metrics gained from any source on these various sites seems to be kind of subject to interpretation. And right now, I'm showing 5 people on YouTube and 1 person on Twitch, but that has been inaccurate in the past. Um, I'm not going to worry about it. And I suggest you don't either. I don't need to be popular. In fact, being popular with this one might not be such a great thing. What happened in the wake of attack helicopter being pulled is that Isabel Fall stopped being someone who acts and became someone who is acted upon. The prevailing narratives about the story erased her agency almost entirely. Fall wanted the story to be titled I Sexually Identify as an Attack Helicopter, and when she eventually retitled it Helicopter Story as a vague gesture of goodwill, many people assumed she had been pressured into doing so. Fall wanted the story taken off the internet, and when it was, many assumed she had been cancelled. Both narratives framed Fall as an unwitting puppet of forces beyond her control. So what does Isabel Fall think? So what does Isabel Fall think? There we go, emphasis on the right syllable. She takes great issue with the way cancel culture has been positioned within the larger culture, while also allowing that certain elements of what happened to her seem to fit within that framework. The powerful want to say that we are entering a dangerous new era where people disliking things en masse has coalesced into some kind of crowdsourced weapon, firing on arbitrary targets from orbit and vaporizing their reputations, she wrote to me in an email. The use of mass social sanction gives the less powerful a weapon against the more powerful, so long as they can mobilize loudly and persistently. This is not new. Shame and laughter are vital tools for freedom. She cautions, however, that, like all weapons, it will do the most damage when aimed at the least defended, the isolated, those with no one to stand up for them, publicly or privately. And we must be careful with the temptation to use it inside our own houses to destroy shapes we think are intruders. If anybody canceled Isabel Fall, it was Isabel Fall. She remains the subject of her own sentences. The story was withdrawn to avoid my death, she says. It was not withdrawn as a concession that it was transphobic or secretly fascist or too problematic for publication. When people approve of its withdrawal, they are approving, even if unwittingly, of the use of gender dysphoria to silence writers. If Twitter makes it very easy for unimportant things to seem like important news, it also creates an environment where one of our deepest, most human impulses becomes almost calcified. When we hurt someone, we want so badly for everyone to see our good intentions and not our actions. It's a natural human impulse. I do it, you do it, Frag does it, everybody involved in this story did it too, including Isabel Fall. But the structure of Twitter and the way it rewards a constant escalation of emotion makes it exceedingly difficult to just back down, to say, I thought I was doing the right thing, but I hurt somebody very badly in the process. Many of those who criticized I Sexually Identify as an Attack Helicopter on the grounds that it was harmful operated with the absolute best of intentions. I have talked to many of them at great length. I believe them when they say that they earnestly thought that the story was a false front for bad actors, because being trans on the internet turns your alarm sensors all the way up. It's not like the internet isn't teeming with awful people hiding in plain sight. Why give anyone the benefit of the doubt? I believe that the story's detractors were hurt by the title, or some of the content, or the very idea of the story. I believe that they truly feel that trans stories should only be written by trans people, and that have Fall should have had to out herself before publishing. I believe they believe, still, that they did the right thing. They still destroyed a woman's life. After she checked out of the hospital, Isabel Fall ceased to be Isabel Fall. I had a few other stories in the works on similar themes, and I withdrew them. That is the most concrete thing I can say I stopped doing, Fall says. More abstractly, more emotionally, I have stopped trying to believe I am a woman or to work towards womanness. If other people want to put markings on my gender sphere and decide what I am, fine. Let them. It's not worth fighting. Isabel Fall was on a path to living as an out trans woman with a career writing science fiction, and now, she says, there will be no more Isabel Fall stories. She is done writing under that name, and she now considers Isabel Fall an impossible goal to achieve, a person she will never be. I don't know what I meant to do as Isabel, she says. I know that publishing Attack Helicopter was an important test for myself, sort of a peer review of my own womanness. I think I tried to open a door, and it was closed from the other side because I did not look the right shape to pass through it. Trans people, trans women especially, can find their first few steps as themselves in public particularly stressful. That stress is why it's so often important for us to have safe ways to explore who we are, under whatever veil of anonymity we can concoct for ourselves. When we're behind that veil, we can divorce ourselves from the identities we were assigned at birth, at least a little bit. To have that veil punctured is a great violence, and Isabel Fall had her veil punctured. Every day, every day, the person who might have been Isabel Fall sees friends who tore down her story and speculated on her true motivations and identity go on with their lives. They are not stuck in the events of January 2020 like she is. These friends don't know who she is. Probably. She doesn't know how to talk to them about it, and to confront anyone about their role in the chaos would require outing herself. She says the one she says only one person has reached out to apologize, via Clark. It ends up with groups of people I thought of as friends all assuring each other they did nothing wrong, and I do not even know that and I do not even know if they know it was me, Fall says. Or they make vague statements about how they are thinking of everyone harmed by the mess around the story, including the author, as if that mess were an inevitable result of publishing a flawed and problematic story. As if the solution was simply to employ even more sensitivity readers who agreed with them and could change the story into something they wanted to read. So, what's the worst that might have happened if, somehow, the attack helicopter detractors were right and the story was a secret reactionary text? As far as I can tell, the worst that would have happened is that another piece of transphobic literature would have existed. To be clear, transphobic literature is worth protesting. I would rather have less of it. But there's a large gap between speaking out against a work of art you find objectionable and trying desperately to sniff out an author's true identity with ever more horrific accusations. It is easy for me to say this with hindsight, of course. I know Isabel Fall just wanted to write a good story. I've seen earlier drafts of that story. I know how hard she worked to make it exactly what she wanted it to be. I suppose that simply by talking with Fall as much as I have subtly put myself on her side. Maybe you shouldn't trust my good intentions either. But in any internet maelstrom that gets held up as a microcosm of the way we live today, one simple factor often gets washed away. These things happened to someone. And the asymmetrical nature of the harm done to that person is hard to grasp until you've been that person. A single critical tweet about the matter was not experienced by Isabel Fall as just one tweet. She experienced it as part of a tsunami that nearly took her life. And that tsunami might have been abated if people had simply asked themselves, what's the worst that could happen if I'm right? And what's the worst that could happen if I'm wrong? Everybody I talked to in the course of reporting this story said some variation on, I hope Isabel is okay. And she is. Sort of. In the months I've spent emailing Isabel Fall, she's revealed herself to be witty and thoughtful and sardonic and wounded and angry and maybe a little paranoid. But who wouldn't be all of those things? Yet I'm emailing with a ghost who exists only in this one email chain. The person who might have been Isabel has given up on actually building a life and career as Isabel Fall. And that is a kind of death. Isabel was somebody I often wanted to be, but not somebody I succeeded at being, she says. I think the reaction to the story proves that I can't be her, or shouldn't be her, or at least won't ever be her. Everyone knew I was a fraud right away. And that was How Twitter Can Ruin a Life by Emily St. James. And it hurts. It actually hurts to read that. It's like thinking, oh, they just pulled it and now they're no longer writing stuff is like the absolute tip of the iceberg with how completely someone's life and potential got utterly crushed. And it is upwards of the worst thing I can think of happening to somebody outside of dying in a tin can slowly over the course of 40 to 50 hours. Uh, the less said on that, the better. It's fine. They didn't suffer. They were in a tin can and they died. Ouch. That was topical. So getting off of the topical thing. So yeah, that has been my TED Talk on I Sexually Identify as an Attack Helicopter by Isabel Fall. It's kind of a post-mortem of what went down. It's kind of a... I really like that Vox article because it does finally get their perspective on the matter. Uh, they may have had an interview in the intervening years since that article was written, but I doubt it based on everything that they were saying. They are no longer they're no longer doing it. They want no part of it, and that's because it was radioactive for them, and that's terrible. Meaning both great and not great. Great as in large, and not great as in it was bad that this happened to this person because they did not, I feel, deserve it. Because the story was really good. I thought it was very entertaining. I thought it was incisive. I thought it was inventive, and I thought it had a good premise and point. Other people can say what they felt about the short story. Again, on certainly on the YouTube one, I don't know if the Twitch one has it. There are links to a archived version of the story that you should be able to read, so you can read it on your own time and check all the things I did wrong. You can read both of the articles. I linked both of those. Again, not getting paid by those people, not shilling for any of them. Just they were good articles, and I felt covered a lot of the territory that I was feeling after reading it and learning more about the absolute shit show that was this story's reception. Um, so yeah, I'm gonna go cry. I may have gotten choked up a couple times because it's just like, oh my gosh, this person just was so crushed and just gave it up. They just gave up. They gave up. And given what happened to them, I absolutely understand why. Absolutely. Because when that happens within 2 weeks, it gets so bad that you're like, I'm pulling this. I can't do this for my mental health. I'm going to kill myself if I keep reading this. Within 2 weeks, 14 days, it was that bad. No. And you could say, oh, well, you should have, you should grow a thicker skin. And it's like, okay, maybe. But they were clearly coming out. They were clearly, this was a piece of their heart that they were putting on display, and it got misconstrued, chewed up, shredded apart, and all for what to me largely feels like the wrong reasons. It's like, okay, if you're going to come up with complaints, say, okay, like work with phrasings. What are the things you did here that you could do better? That sort of thing. It's like be. I'm not saying that all criticism has to be constructive, but I think you should be trying for constructive criticism when you're criticizing. It's easier. It's an easier pill to swallow for starters, so it's more likely to have an impact. And for seconds, it's like it's hopefully making the world a better place, sort of thing. It's like, oh, this person's going to grow and improve. Whereas what they were doing was what a lot of people were doing was in no way trying to make people grow and improve. It was, this person is the wrong kind of person and they're saying the wrong thing. Therefore, groupthink says no, be gone, be banished from the realm. Well, that fucking worked, didn't it? It sure did. Pardon my expletives. I try to keep those to a minimum. I don't succeed. So yeah, that was that. So, itinerary news. I'm not going to be around for at least the next week, probably the next 2 weeks. So I'm sorry to everybody who's like rolling around, scratching at their veins, trying to get, hoping for acceptance to be read aloud. It will be coming right after I get back. Whatever Friday I get back from my. It's not as much of a vacation jaunt as I would like. I should add, it is not really that. It is more businessy. um, there will hopefully be. I will take what vacationing out of it I can get. I'm going to take what I can get out of it. But I will not be in state. I will not have access to. I need a computer. I will not have access to a computer that'll allow me to fiddle with this stuff. Or respond to comments, probably. So if I'm ghosted for 2 weeks, it's not because I don't love y'all. I love y'all, but, or whatever. Don't know any of you all that well. All that well to say I love you, but I'm glad you guys tuned in. It's nice. Makes me feel warm and fuzzy, I guess. It's, that chemical feedback loop, that endorphin hit. It's why I avoid social media, actually, because I've seen how addictive that shit is. Like, I've known people who had addiction to various things throughout my life, and so it's wild. Knowing someone who's addicted to cigarettes, someone who is addicted to World of Warcraft. It's like it's interesting seeing the similarities. People who are addicted to social media, and it's really easy. Social media is in fact very insidious because you're not actually imbibing something that's like a chemical. It's chemicals made by your brain, admittedly through outside stimulus. Um, but it's like it really gets in there. It really gets in there, and that's how you can really adjust someone's value sets too. If you can really work with them, that's like great tool. Uh, Great tool for brainwashing. if you could cobble together an algorithm that could get someone from believing one thing into believing another, which I don't doubt is very possible and doable. Yeah, I could tell how easy it is to get addicted to doom scrolling. I know I was guilty of that during this last week when the Ocean Gate thing was everybody's latest disaster obsession. Let's not talk. It's like that episode of Star Trek. Yes, Drumbeat, I think it's called. It's one of my absolute favorites. It's uh, oh man. Like I'd love to just watch that episode of Star Trek Next Generation on stream. Or it is Next Generation, right? Not original series. I'm pretty sure it's yeah. It's just oh yes, the one with the Riker game. Yes, yeah, it's like that. It's all about reward stimulus, basically. It's brain chemistry. That's another good one. Drumbeat's a great one though. Um, Drumbeat's a great one. That one is just like especially like for the last decade or so. 2 decades, 3 decades since Reagan. It's been pretty cool to watch that episode and be like, damn, nothing's changed. They really had hammered the nail on the head on that one. They got it. They got it. They understood. Um, oh man, that one's killer. Not every episode of Next Generation is killer, but some episodes are really good. When that show is good, it is good. When that show is bad, it's like, why am I watching this? Why is why is she making out with a ghost right now? What is happening? What is this? Uh, anyway, anyway, I had a point. It's gone now. Anyway, so yeah, I'm going to be gone for about 2 weeks. I might be back after just 1 week. We'll see if I'm really, really lucky. We'll find out. But definitely at least a week. So I will not be here next week in any event. So yeah, with that, once I do get back, it will be scheduled as usual for Free Read Fridays. We'll be getting right into Acceptance by Jeff Vandermeer. So the people waiting with bated breath for that one will get that, and their conclusion to the Area X/Southern Reach trilogy. Whether they find it a satisfying conclusion is entirely up to them. I dug it. I thought it was cool. I've said this before, but generally I'm not going to read something here that I don't think is cool. I'll miss me too, Warren. Don't worry. I'll miss me too. I get to put on a certain face, as it were. My Mecha Monday stream will do the follow-up stream to Running Amok. That's a pun, a play on words. There's a game that came out in '96 called Amok, and I'm going to be running through it. It's funny. Laugh, please laugh. Um, so we'll get through that. And Warframe Wednesdays, I'll do whatever I'm doing for Warframe Wednesday. I honestly have no idea anymore. I don't. I'm barely awake during those. I swear, half the time I've got to turn it into a wordy Wednesday. I still play Warframe, so if there's Warframe fans out there, hi, add me to your friends list or something. It's just Fraggoth. It's in the name. Um, yeah. So I'm on, not super frequently, but I'm on like every week. But nobody tunes into those basically. So for purposes of streaming and having on YouTube, I kind of fail to see the point. I don't know what number of episodes I'm up to on those. It's probably approaching 200 like these are. I cannot believe I've had 200 episodes of each of these done. It's kind of wild. Now, mind you, they weren't all called Free Read Fridays. It was originally Storytime Saturdays, and then my schedule changed and it had to become Free Read Fridays. I'm thinking of bringing Storytime Saturdays back when I do all that, and it's probably going to be like beginning of next year, is my guess, at the soonest. I'm probably going to just like erase episode counts and just be like, it's this episode of this date, and you can figure it out from there. Um, and then it'll be easier to do that anyway. I don't have to keep track of an episode number. It's really hard because I'm always like, shit, what episode number am I up to? I have to then go onto the page, look for the thing, find it, be like, okay, that was 198. This is 199. Okay, very good. We do live in a linear three-dimensional space-time. Excellent, excellent. Okay, I am reassured by that. So, after we get acceptance done, I'm going to keep the Free Read Fridays. I'm thinking of adding the Storytime Saturdays, so I'll have an additional. The problem with that is I need time for my throat to recover because the talking constantly for 2-3 hours at a whack is draining. It's draining. It's hard. It's harder than I'd thought, especially if it's like really super intense, like I don't know, CJ Cherry's stuff that I've done. Like there are sequences in those where I break out into an actual sweat, where I'm like, I have to breathe. My hands are shaking. Or Blind Sight. Blind Sight gets me. Blind Sight gets me like that too, and a few others I've done. Anyway, with that, I am going to dip. Stay safe. Stay sane. Stay toasty or cool as per your preference. Damp or damp or dry as per your preference. Damp or desiccated. Ooh, that's alliterative. I like that one. Ooh, I like that one a lot. It was either moist or I don't know of a what's a synonym for dry that has starts with an M. I can't think of one off the top of my head, so it's not worth it. So damp or desiccated as per your preference. And if this episode has shown anything, I try to live by the be decent to each other thing. I have been, I can very readily be accused of saying mean things. I've said mean things about people before. I often regret them, even even if I still think they deserved it, largely because I feel it reflects very poorly on me. I believe I can do better than that, and I believe everyone can do better. We largely like to think of ourselves as, in control of our actions and not shackled to the whims of the chemicals that make us go and the and basically our DNA, really, and the imperative of carbon-based life everywhere and pattern-making organized existence all over the planet. But we can be better, I believe, because we can think about it. Just try not to breathe too much. Tell me about it. Oh my gosh. Um, yeah, it's kind of nutty. Um, yeah, where I am is actually better than I used to live. Not in terms of uh, you know, forests being on fire and reaping the benefits of global warming and stuff, and forest fires covering huge swaths of territory and the smoke and all that. But it used to be around a lot more pollution than I am now. So it's like this is kind of a return to form, and it's kind of like, oh man, I remember how much it sucked living there, feeling like you had a cold basically all the time. Since I've moved, it's been great. The great wild north. Anyway, soon to be silicon based life. If only we could get over the storage and energy capacities to deal with uploading a consciousness to a mainframe, I'd be all for it. Uh, I don't know. I honestly, if confronted with the very real possibility, okay, you have the chance to upload your brain to the mainframe or whatever, and basically become effectively immortal for as long as you want to be immortal as a digital existence. I don't know what I would do. Now, touching on that subject is going to be fun when I get to the Greg Egan books touching on that. I love Greg Egan. It's like this man has thought of things. Had you ever considered what it would be like to be a digital existence? An energy being? Greg Egan has. Anyway, so yeah, be decent to each other. I guess this is me outing myself as saying, hey, by the way, if you're whatever persuasion you are, this comment section is theoretically a safe space for you. I am a safe space for you. Hopefully that doesn't mean I have to become someone's therapist. I'm not saying that to be like derisive or downplaying people's problems, but it's like, you don't know me, I don't know you. Um, we can get to know each other, that's fine. But let's maintain that veneer, I guess, for now. But a lot of you seem like really cool folks. That's to the comment section. But people in general seem like cool folks as soon as they seem like cool folks, and I think we can largely get to know each other better. What I'm saying is we need to move to space so that we all get a sixth sense of empathy and become new types, like Yoshiyuki Tomino was saying would be maybe a good idea, except the entire point of every work he's done that dealt with the concept of new types actually involved how they just be used as weapons for war and kind of wholly undermines, well, actually, it accents the fact that it's such a beautiful possibility and then just kind of gets crapped on by people being people. Really, when you get down and dirty into some of the themes and stuff brought up in the Mobile Suit Gundam series, meta series, at least the ones done by Yoshiyuki Tomino, you get some pretty interesting stuff there. That's one of the ones. His novelization is one that I'm going to definitely be doing at some point on one of these streams. Anyway, that's rambling enough for everyone, and I'm going to call it. So I will. Yeah, I do not trust big. Well, you see, so long as your brain could be intact, you could be you digitally and you not digitally. Um, but it probably would fry your brain. Continuity'd be real interesting to work with at that point. I don't know how that would work. I just don't like I'm not the first person to say, "Hey, do you have like a place where people can talk?" And I'm like, "I've thought about it. I could probably set up, I don't know, a Discord server or something. I'd do an ICQ, an IRC. There we go. Go retro. I want to set up a news group. There we go. The Frag Stream news group. Um but yeah, I mean, I wouldn't mind doing something like that. I look at it not with disdain, but like, okay, then I'd have to actually keep an eye on it and start moderating it or assign people to moderate it, and it's like it would turn into it would be scope creep. There we go. It would be scope creep. And right now, even though I've been doing this for how many years, I'm not really quite ready to creep the scope that much, but I'm getting there. So I'm going to keep that in mind, actually, for if I do these big revisions that I'm thinking of doing come the end of the year. Um, we'll see. We'll see. Um, keep it in mind and keep other people in mind. So there. All right, I'm gonna run. I got stuff I gotta do. Like I needed to do like half an hour ago, but it doesn't matter. I was reading good stuff aloud to people who seem to appreciate it, and that's all the approval and stimulation I need to say yes, yes. What I do has value. Um, insert that quote from the movie Network here. Mad as hell, and I'm not gonna take it anymore. What I do has value. Just leave me alone with my toaster and my microwave and my television set, or what have you. There is a well in front of you. Look down the well. I look down the well. Yes. Oh my God, we need to set up. That's what it will be. The community will be a mud. Oh my God. Brilliant. I now have to learn how to program a mud. I could do that. I could probably do that. I have the technical skill. I could probably make that happen. I'm not going to do that. If somebody else wants to make the Free Read Fridays stream mud, please feel free. Um, that takes me back. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna run. Seriously, I have to go. All right. Thanks to everyone tuning in. Um, see you all in probably 2 weeks, but maybe a week. Alrighty. It'll be relatively unannounced. I'm sorry. People who are subscribed or whatever will probably find out. I don't actually know how that works because I don't really subscribe to people on these things. Do they send you an email? I'm not a Luddite. That's a discussion. We're not going to have the Luddite discussion. So Luddites get a bad rap. Okay, I really have to stop. We're like tangenting into like fourth dimensional hypercube territory. I can see the inside curve of the toroid right now, and I'm like, we have to get away from this. I need to get back to my three-dimensional space-time. So I'm not going to go into hypothetical discussions on the Luddite movement and how it's not about people hating technology. That's what Big Corpo wanted you and continues to want you to think. And that's how it got into public parlance. But it's actually about people who are like, hey, look, my job is being completely obliterated. And because of this kind of machinery, and there is no safety net whatsoever for me to save my bacon, and it's going to be bad. So basically, look at what's going on with AI generated art and sound and all that, and what's happening to artists as a result. What will happen? There is no could happen. There is a will happen. That's how this works. Will happen to those people if there is no safety net put into place. You will have Luddites Mark II. They'll have another name. It'll be catchy. It'll be like Ooze Gems or something. I don't know what young people or new technologically online people call things now. It makes no sense to me. Silicon Valley will probably come up with a name for it, or we'll get lucky and it'll be named after someone, and it'll be a very easy to remember name that will never have consequences going down. Have you ever met someone named Luddite? I've never met someone named Luddite. I have met some people named Lud though, so actually it is still a name. Um, yes, I have died of dissenters. Dysentery. See, I like that. That's a good potential word play, word pun. Where what's a good what's a good tea disease? Um, Trichinosis would be one, but that rhymes with like tangents, as well as like dysentery does with dissenters. Ugh, damn. That's a really good puner play on words. I'm remembering that. I'm remembering that. Thank you. It's like I'm feeling uh, when I want to go onto social media, I'm looking for my dose of Pepto Dismal. Okay, I'm done. Thanks, guys and goyles, dudes and dudettes. Whatever you be, whatever you identify as. I don't care what you identify as. I'll try to remember. I can't promise that I will. Please don't be too offended if I forget. But have a good one. I will see you all. Well, not see. You get what I mean.